we're just going to run through this, and you can tell me if there is anything that you specifically have questions about. Now, I'm going to ask you, right now you have the option to share your screen. I'm going to ask you not to do that, okay? Because it would take, it just don't do that unless I ask you to do that. Okay. Now, if I ask you to do that, that'll be different, and that would be if you want to show me something specific that you have questions about, okay? All right, so I know you know that I'm very clever right here with what I did. So, anyway, okay, so first of all, how comfortable do you think you are with the contract? Do you want me to, I mean, with the purchase agreement?
You know, I've done a lot of, in my business career, I've written hundreds of contracts, if you will, but they're not exactly residential purchase agreements, but I've done a lot of contracting. So walking people through the languaging and understanding what it's saying or not saying, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I always have been.
Okay.
But where it gets a little bit confusing for me, honestly, is in this section here, where we talk about the consumer agency disclosure, the RECAD, and you know, when is it that we have Keller Williams, Alabama Gulf Coast on both sides of the ledger, and when we don't?
Okay. All right, so this is good. Let's have a conversation about agency, okay? Yeah. And don't feel bad, because this is something that a lot of agents have had problems with in the past. And you will find that agents from other companies, when you get contracts from them, very often they will just forget this whole section right here completely. Yeah. Or they will have it wrong. Okay. And even when I came to Keller Williams, when I started with Keller Williams, I was the only person who knew that the only way you have dual agency is if the buyer has a buyer agency agreement with an agent in your company or with you. Okay. Yes. If there is no buyer agency agreement, there is no dual agency. So let's say that you are representing the buyer, the seller. You have the listing, and you also have been working with the buyer. But if you have not had that buyer sign a buyer agency agreement, then you are representing the seller, and you are a transaction broker only for the buyer. Okay. And it can get real tricky. I mean, that protects you more legally, quite frankly, because you are not called on to advise. You are representing the seller. And I think one of the best ways to think about agency overall is to remember that an agent is just that. An agent is an agent for the brokerage. You follow me? Yeah, absolutely. The broker is actually the one who is representing whoever. Okay. And that's particularly important in dual agency, because if you remember that the broker has signed an agreement saying, or you for the broker have signed an agreement saying Keller Williams is going to represent you. But when there's no buyer agency agreement signed, that brokerage has not agreed to represent that buyer. Okay. All we have agreed to do is facilitate making offers, opening doors, and writing contracts, and perhaps giving some referrals, at least 3 or 4, for any vendor that they're looking for, whether it be an inspector or a pool contractor or whatever. Right. We can do that, but we are not called on to heavily advise. And we certainly are not called on, we don't have to even prepare, like if they're going to put in an offer, we don't have to pull comps for them. We don't have to do a competitive analysis for them, which a lot of times you don't do for a buyer anyway, but you can. It can help you. So buyer agency protects your time in that they can only buy from you. Right. All right. And this isn't a buyer agency class, so I'm not going to go go into all of that. Hang on just a second, Marcus. I just knocked my glass off the table. Hold on just a second.
Okay.
All right. So buyer agency does not, it protects your time. It is saying, I'm going to go and show you all these properties, and you're going to commit to me to purchase only through me for the next 6 months or year or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
In return for that, I'm going to be able to do a lot more for you. I'm going to be able to advise you. I'm going to be able to do comparative market analysis for you on any property that you're interested in to make sure that you're getting the right price. I'm going to be able to do many more things for you as your agent than I can do as a transaction broker. However, if all you want me to do is open doors for you and write offers for you, I can do that, but I'll have to do that as a transaction broker. You may not even want to have that conversation with your buyer. And here's why. It may be a buyer that you don't want to represent. You know, they're wishy-washy. They're, they don't value your expertise. They don't value what a realtor has to offer, and all they're having you do is, open doors. On the other hand, you may want to do a buyer agency with somebody like that because it keeps them from going elsewhere. And if they do go elsewhere,
how do you make that decision? I guess like one of the things is
it's almost like a judgment call. It's almost like a character call. If you've got somebody, I've actually had people go and look at properties with me that say, thank you for opening this, but we always put the offers through the listing agent. That's where you haven't done enough qualification of this person who's having you show properties.
Mm-hmm.
You follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's where you've just jumped up. We call them pop-ups. And that means they call you and you're on duty and you go and show them a house, without knowing that they're working with another broker, without asking the right questions, another agent, in other words, without asking the right questions before you go and get in your car and show them that property. And in the past, I would go and show people, like when I first got started, my first year in the business, I was truly an unpaid chauffeur for a lot of people. I ran all over the county showing people properties that they never bought from me, and I never saw them again.
Mm-hmm.
And, that comes with experience, knowing the right questions to ask. But one of them certainly is, are you working with another realtor?
Right.
And if, and then you ask them, how is that relationship with that realtor? Is it a good relationship? Well, then I need to step away from this conversation, Mr. Buyer, and ask you to call your realtor, because we don't step into, we don't want to hurt your relationship with another realtor out of respect for you and that realtor.
Okay.
And for my time as well, knowing that you may end up purchasing this property through that realtor. And most of the time they'll say thank you and move on. When you've worked enough buyers, you kind of start to get a sixth sense of whether they're actually going to work with you or not, or whether they're going to be honest with you or not.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would suggest this. I would suggest going to a buyer consultation class.
Okay.
If Dawn Mays does one,
Mm-hmm.
or if Heather Loper does one, theirs are excellent. I would say Dawn's is Heather's is really, really good. She's very good about covering the specifics of getting them to feel comfortable with her.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn is very good at making them understand why it is important that they sign buyer's agency.
Are they strong believers in buyer agency agreements then?
Heather never works with anyone without a buyer agency agreement.
Isn't that interesting though? Because I was talking to John Kimbrough and he doesn't.
Yeah, well, I didn't. And there are conflicting opinions about this.
Yeah.
If you have Now, I've had buyer agency actually bind me to a person who would have otherwise gone and purchased from somebody else. I know that. And the only reason he stuck with me was because we had a buyer agency agreement.
Okay.
He was not a loyal person.
Mhm.
But we did several lowball offers. He was that kind of buyer.
Oh, yeah.
And on the very first one, he said, I want you to work hard to get this offer approved.
Mhm.
And so I agreed to do buyer agency with you because I want you working on my behalf. And then beyond that, I had worked so hard for this guy. I mean, staying till midnight writing offers for him at the office. It was crazy. And so I, in that instance, kept reminding him that he was going to have to buy through me because of the buyer agency agreement. And so he did. But I think otherwise he would have just run off and worked with whoever was around, you know.
Liz, what about the fiduciary component of that? I mean, some people get caught up in the idea. When I was talking to Zach James, he worries about liability, and I'm like,
and there is liability. There is. If you are, okay, so can I give you another example from my experience?
yeah, absolutely.
And that will show you how it was an advantage to me to work as a transaction broker in this situation rather than as an agent for the buyer.
Okay.
I had a listing, and in that listing, well, in the course of having that listing, I had a fella call me, and he said, I am interested in this house. Will you show it to me? He decided to make an offer on it. When we sat down, I explained buyer agency to him, and I said, now I can work with you however you want. It's your choice. I can either represent you as a buyer or I can be a transaction broker for you. However, in limited consensual dual, which is, of course, when you've got the listing, you've got the buyer and they've signed a buyer's agency agreement, what that means is you really are working for both, but you're actually working for neither, because you can't do anything that will hurt the other side in the transaction or in the negotiation.
Yeah, it does definitely limit your ability to, quote, negotiate. You know,
it does. And so I explained that to him, and I said, I can advise you, but only to a point. And he said, we don't need to do buyer agency. I trust you. Those were his exact words. And he said, I'm fine being a transaction agent, or a transaction client. And so, or customer. And I said, great. So I went ahead, prepared an offer for him, worked for him to the best of my ability. There wasn't a whole lot to it. He made an offer. They accepted the offer. Now, here was the tricky part. His wife lived in California. She had not seen the house. All right. So we did a walkthrough the day before closing, and then we closed. Well, at the closing, his wife showed up. They had not been to the house. He had just picked her up at the airport. Okay. That night, I got a call from him. And he said, there are rat droppings or something in the attic. And we don't want this house. And I said, well, that's a problem because you did a walkthrough. And not only did he do a walkthrough, but he looked in the attic. And he said, well, the house is filthy. And I said, but you did a walkthrough just yesterday. And he said, you come look at this house. And so I said, okay, I will. So I went up there. I took my husband with me. I took a camera with me. When I got there, he was not there. And he had left a note in the mailbox. It's amazing I even saw it. I just happened to park right in front of the mailbox. And he said, house is open, go on in. Call me. And so I went in the house, which was kind of scary. I went in the house. I took pictures of the house, including the attic. Took a ladder, in fact, to climb up in the attic because he had mentioned it. To make a long story short, the house looked fine. and I had photographs to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
I called him and I told him my opinion. I said, the house doesn't have to be in immaculate, hospital condition. It's clean. They moved out of it and left it basically clean.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've been in touch with the seller and they have said they will pay for a professional person to come in and do a move out cleaning for you at their expense. He started screaming at me to the point where I couldn't even understand what he was saying. And then he told me he had talked to attorneys, but that I had really pulled the wool over his eyes by being a transaction broker instead of representing him as a seller. And remember, it was his choice. However, had I been a buyer's agent in that circumstance, it would have been a lot stickier.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Because I would have had more liability there. I still believe it would have turned out the same way. Now, you know what really happened, right? His wife didn't like the house.
That's right.
I mean, that was
an excuse.
that was it. I mean, they immediately put it back up for sale. And that's all there was to it. My agency, I was working with Coldwell Banker at the time, and my agency even said, we will pay to have any cleaning company come and clean this house for you that you want. And he wouldn't respond to that. And it was because it didn't have anything to do with the cleanliness of the house, And so she just didn't like the house. That's all there was to it. But that's where not having buyer's agency helped me. And so Zach is right about you have a higher level of liability. So it does help protect your time, because you're spending time working with a buyer who may or may not buy from you. But if there's a buyer agency agreement in place, at least your broker, in this case, Danita, has something to go to the other broker with and say, if they work with the listing agent, can say, did your agent do due diligence and find out if there was a buyer agency agreement or not? And if she did, why did she continue working with this buyer?
Mm-hmm.
And so, because Article 16 of Code of Ethics, and most people don't know this, even a lot of brokers, states that it is against the Code of Ethics for an agent to step into an existing agent relationship. So that's how I've defended, buyer agency agreements before. And it surprises brokers when another broker says to them, well, this happened and this is a violation of Code of Ethics, because a lot of them don't even know that. So, okay. So, let's talk more about agency. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get into that. All right. So in agency at the top, and by the way, this is an area in contracts that a lot of companies or a lot of agents, including ours from time to time, miss. They just don't fill this out for some strange reason.
They don't know.
Yeah, it's odd, but anyway. So up here, of course, you put the listing company is, the selling company is. All right. When you've got a situation like I've put on this contract right here,
Mm-hmm.
When you've got this situation, both sides need to mirror each other. And the reason for that is because the brokerage is the one involved here. So let's say Rosemary has the buyer and you have the seller.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in that case, and for some reason I can't get these boxes to check, so I'm just going to put an X on it.
Mm-hmm.
You're an agent of the seller. Rosemary is an agent of the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
However, guess what?
The broker's still also the agent of the buyer and agent of the seller.
Right. So in this circumstance, you would not check what I checked.
Oh.
Okay. You would go down here and you would check here.
Both. Mm-hmm.
And here. Okay.
So by default, it's limited consensual dual agency because
there's a buyer. Yeah.
Represent the seller, and it's the same broker.
Right, it's the same broker. So that is what limited consensual dual agency is. Now, if there is no buyer agency agreement, you know what you would do there? Can you guess?
Yeah, down here, transaction broker.
Either buyer
Yeah.
and seller on both sides, you would do
Oh.
that. Assisting the buyer
Mm-hmm.
as transaction broker and an agent of the seller up here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But on this side, it's the same thing because I can't get that one to check. See,
Okay.
like I said, but anyway, you're assisting the buyer on both sides because it's the broker, it's the brokerage, it's not the agent. And so if you can think of it as I'm an agent for the broker, but who is the broker really representing? The broker is an agent of the seller and is also assisting the buyer as a transaction broker.
Okay.
You see? So when our company is,
It's becoming more clear to me. It really has to do with whose name is up there on that line.
absolutely it does, but it also has to do with the relationship with the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
If we have buyer agency, if we have a seller and we have buyer agency,
Mm-hmm.
no matter who the agent in the company is that's working with them, the company is still they're either, I mean, you're only going to have consensual dual, remember, if there's a buyer agency agreement.
That's right.
Okay. If there is no buyer agency agreement, but both parties are working with our company,
Mm-hmm.
the broker is an agent of the seller and the broker is assisting the buyer as a transaction broker. So what I'm saying is if Keller Williams has both sides,
Right.
these two sides should always be the same on both sides.
Okay.
Because it's not who you're representing, it's who the broker's representing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's say that you have the seller and you got the listing, but Coldwell Banker, and I'm just going to say CBRP, Coldwell Banker Real Properties,
Okay.
because that's what they would put on theirs. Okay, I just know that because I used to work for them. So they have the buyer. Real simple. Keller Williams is an agent of the seller. Coldwell Banker is an agent of the buyer. All right.
Assuming they have an buyer agency agreement.
Assuming they have, but that's not our business. I mean, when you get an offer on your listing,
Mm-hmm.
they're either going to fill it out as they're an agent of the buyer, or they're assisting the buyer as a transaction broker. It can look like this. You see?
Yeah.
Okay. So, when you get an offer from somebody else, it's going to have one of those two things. If you have the listing, it's going to come in and it's going to say they're an agent of the buyer or they're assisting the buyer as a transaction broker.
I have a question for you. Are you ever a seller as a transaction broker?
No.
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 I didn't think so, because if the listing agreement is an agency agreement.
Right. Now, there are some people that are not members of the MLS.
Oh, well, yeah.
Not many. They're not realtors. Okay. There's a guy named Harry King who is a big investor and property owner in Baldwin County. He's not a member of the board, but he writes offers. And he might even present an offer that looks something like this, although he's not supposed to use the board contract, which is what this is. But he might have his own contract that states that he is assisting the seller as a transaction broker. Okay. Well, he wouldn't be presenting the offer in that case, but let's just say he has a buyer. All right. Then he might well come with something that is similar to this, but he may not use the board's contract, but he'll have a contract that may be similar to this. And it would still look the same. Assisting buyer as transaction broker. But if he has a listing and somebody brings him an offer like this, then he would check this. Sorry, he would check seller. Assisting seller as transaction broker. Okay. Because in the eyes of the law, he can do either. We as a company never ever work with sellers without them being without having agency with them.
So in other words, that an attorney or some other type of specialty role could be in the form of a transaction broker assisting a seller. They don't have to be a licensed realtor. Right.
Now they can also have agency. You know, they're still real estate agents, and they can assist them even if they're not realtors and they're not a member of the MLS. They can still assist them as their agent because they are agents in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the state. And so then they would probably put that they're an agent of the seller up here when they're signing it. But they can put that they are assisting the seller as a transaction broker if all they're doing is writing a contract for them or sticking a sign in the yard and not doing much else, you know. But agency can be tricky. And so it's really important that people understand that unless there is a buyer agency agreement, there is no agency agreement with that buyer.
Okay.
And it's always transaction broker if that's not the case. Okay.
How would this look if it were a FSBO?
Okay. You would put that on here. And there's a one-time show and sell too form that we have. But you would put I'm sorry. It would. Let me change this.
We can talk about that separately. Yeah, say I bring a buyer, make an offer to a FSBO. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I'm going to show you that right now. Okay. All right. So the listing company, you would put FSBO. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to do is just put FSBO. You do not really need to, I mean, you know, you can say that you're assisting the seller as a transaction broker, but I think the best thing to do is just leave all this blank.
Yeah.
And put Keller Williams up Gulf Coast up here, and assisting the buyer as a whatever, or do an agent of the buyer, one of those two.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Now make sure this is one of the most commonly missed, and again, I don't know why people miss this whole area right here when they're filling out offers, but they do. Make sure that you get the seller's initials or the buyer's initials, whoever you're representing or whoever you're working with. Make sure that you don't skip that part. Okay? Because that is something.
So FSBO, I need to get that owner just initial.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Both sides need to be initialed, whether it's a for sale by owner or whether it's, you know, through an agency. Right. Another thing that, and this is, if I had to guess one thing that is missed more than anything else on contracts, it's this right here at the top where it says acceptance date and initials. That is only to be completed when you have an acceptance, a full acceptance.
Yeah, and not during all those interim back and forth
counter offers. Yeah, no. Until there is someone who says accepted and they sign off on it, those are the people. You put the acceptance date right there, and those are the people who need to initial it. Okay. Another thing, you know, if there's a property that's being purchased by, let's say the buyer is in town, the husband is out of town. All right.
Okay.
I would attempt to get both parties on the offer if you can.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot get both purchasers to sign off on it, go ahead and present the offer with a note to the other party that the seller will sign on such and such a time. You can even do it as an addendum to the purchase agreement if you want to.
Well, to protect yourself, would you not at least make sure that that other party to the purchase would at least send you an email or something in writing?
Yes,
No.
do something. Let them know that the husband is out of town, he's in full agreement, but we're not going to be able to get his signature until, 2 days from now or whatever.
Okay.
Those things happen.
Well,
Now,
be in the hospital.
I mean, they can also get it at closing, but quite frankly, as an agent, I wouldn't want to work that way.
Yeah, it's too much uncertainty. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I had a situation where there was a husband who was out of town, and we were getting ready to close in 2 days, and he came into town and said, "Oh, I don't like this mortgage. We've got to stop everything until we get a better mortgage." And it did stop everything because the sellers had already moved out of their house, believe it or not. And then this buyer comes in. Now that I was not an experienced agent at that point, I probably could have made that not happen, maybe. However, when you look, I think it's still in here. Okay. I don't know that it's still in here. There used to be in the most contracts, and I'm talking 15 years ago, Marcus, there used to be something in the mortgage thing that said there was an additional 30 days to be provided if terms of the mortgage could not be closed or caused mortgage not to be closed, and a new mortgage had to be obtained. That actually was in the contract. But the wording was such that it gave a big loophole for people.
Oh.
And this guy used that, and he was waiting to sign the closing papers at closing. So they had no deal. If the sellers didn't allow them to do that, then he could have just said, "Well, I'm not closing." And he wasn't on the offer because he was out of the country and he had never signed it. And I was brand new at that point. That's a rookie mistake, that I never made again. But you can have these things fully signed at closing, but I don't like taking that risk. Okay. Okay. Do you have any other questions? I mean, like, let me cover this. Okay. Do you know how to get the legal description on a property?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You do? You go to Baldwin County. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because a lot of new agents don't know that.
Yeah.
And you can also find the PIN number there as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. Our PPIN number. Okay.
Yeah, I've played around with that. Yes.
Okay. So of course you put it, and when you do a legal description, all you have to put in there, you don't have to put in the whole thing. All you have to put in is the lot number, the block number. If there are different phases, you put in the phase number and put in the subdivision.
Okay.
And actually just putting in lot 3, block C, Seminole Landing would be plenty.
Okay.
Just enough to describe from the legal description that you could narrow down where is this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Meets and bounds.
That's on a plat or something, isn't it? That's a subdivision. Okay.
But it's also on the assessment or appraisal under the Revenue Commissioner site. It
retains all that information. I didn't know it would keep that phase information or something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
here,
Oh,
can you see
yeah,
this?
I sure can. Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
see.
this is actually the appraisal on my property under the Revenue Commissioner, Baldwin County Revenue Commissioner page. Okay, you go to baldwincountyal.gov and pull up and click on the Revenue Commissioner situation. Okay, and when you go into the Revenue Commissioner site,
Mhm.
you can go, there's a thing that says search properties or it's on the left. It says property appraisals. It's on
Okay.
the left side of the screen.
All
Okay.
right. Mhm.
Um, let me see if I can pull that up.
Yeah, I know I've been here, but okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go back.
Mm.
Let me see. Okay. So just remember it's under Revenue Commissioner, and you're going to want to look at appraisals and click appraisals on the left, and then go in and put in, usually just putting in, what I did was I put in our last name and I put in our address and I put in our zip code. Okay. And that was enough to pull it up. If you saw before, I put it in and did not put our name in, and it pulled up all this. So
Yeah.
if you can get a last name, it helps. Okay.
So it
And
gives you a
so,
range of addresses. That's interesting.
yes, a range of addresses. And so then just submit it. And we happen to be the first one on the page here. And here it is. The PPIN number is right here. Okay.
Yep.
And here
Mhm.
is that.
And that's the only critical part. It's right there. Obviously, you don't need all
Yeah.
dimensions.
Lot 3, Block C, Phase 4, Seminole Landing. Enough would have been Lot 3, Block C, Seminole Landing.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let
Okay.
me get back to the purchase agreement. Okay. So now meets and bounds, most of the time that means it is out. It's not in a subdivision,
Mm-hmm.
or it is in way out in the country somewhere.
Okay.
It says see attached exhibit. I've never done that.
Yeah.
I just never have done that. I suppose you could put, a plat map, or you could put something. You could probably you could even put a copy of the appraisal from the Revenue Commission on there. And it'll probably say meets and bounds in the legal description.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So up here, you put the purchase price. Now, I did that wrong, by the way. You should fill this out the same way you would fill out a check.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Gotta spell it out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
Or
you
just
literally
put in.
found out dollars.
Yeah. I mean, 350,000 is fine. But you've got it right here.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's talk about terms of it. Did you have a question for me?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about terms. Okay. If it's cash, they have a thing in here saying this offer. And by the way, here's why I do this. All right. I don't like a blank in a contract. This is just me. I don't like a blank in a contract because I feel like somebody can come back and fill in what they want to there.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a lot of places in this contract where there are blanks, and it says 5 business days if left blank or whatever. Wherever that is, just be smart and put a line in there.
Okay.
I just don't like blanks. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you've got a cash offer, unless the buyer just really, really wants it to have it appraised, they're usually, if it's cash, just going to put it's not subject to an appraisal. Because when it's cash, you don't need an appraisal for a loan. You follow me?
Yes, I muted you because of my dog.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes.
That's okay. The dog's not going to bother me. Okay. All right. So most of the time, not all the time these days, but most of the time, you're going to have somebody applying for a mortgage. All right. So you go through, and by the way, Fairhope Single Tax Corporation, property.
Yeah.
Have you been through a class on that yet, Marcus?
Well, you mean we've discussed it in our class, but I haven't gone down to Fairhope to take their little orientation.
Can I give you a real quick overview of that?
Yeah.
This is just a capsule view.
Yeah, because
Fairhope.
one of my people searching right now is looking in Fairhope.
Okay, so let me make this real simple. Okay, people make it complicated because the single tax corporation wants to make it complicated, but it's not complicated. Here's the deal. Fairhope was founded on certain economic principles that were very popular at the turn of the century. There was a guy named Henry something Clay, not Henry Clay, Henry something. Anyway, he wrote a book and he talked about how you should be able to own land outright instead of paying taxes on it. There should be a corporation that owns all this land and they pay the property taxes plus some, and whatever is left over goes to creating a utopian community. Fairhope was founded on the principles of that book. This guy was like a superstar at the time. He was like, I mean, he was very, very famous. He never came to Fairhope. I'm not sure he ever knew about Fairhope.
That's funny.
But there's a statue to him in one of the parks on the bay. There is. And he wrote this book and he was famous. So these people in Wisconsin and Iowa and Ohio, maybe not Iowa, Ohio, Wisconsin, and I can't remember what other state, but there was this cluster of people who were followers of him. And they saved up a lot of money and decided they wanted to do this. They wanted to start this new community. And so they sent out scouts all over the United States to look at great locations to start, with favorable circumstances to start this community. And that's how they found the property that is now known as Fairhope. And they put together their money and they bought all the land that is now in the colony. And that was the original Fairhope.
They've never expanded?
I'm sorry, what?
They've never expanded?
I don't believe they ever did. Well, I don't know that, Quail Creek subdivision is actually part of the single tax colony. So I don't know if that came later or what happened. And single tax actually bought some additional property. So it did expand to a degree.
Okay.
But anyway, this property that they bought, they put all of their money and they formed a nonprofit corporation on the principles of Henry's book. And that corporation owns all of the land to this day. They own all of that land. And instead of paying property taxes, the people who have that property, instead of owning it outright, they have a 99-year lease. Every time a property is, quote unquote, purchased in the single tax colony, they are getting a 99-year lease on the land only. They own the house. They don't own the land. All right. So,
so effectively the house is a leasehold improvement, really. I mean,
yeah, right.
It's interesting. We had an operation in California. We had a milling operation that one side of the milling operation was owned by a different farming company, and the other side was a 99-year lease. It kind of reminded me of that. I never did understand from our ownership why they did a 99-year lease. But
yeah, interesting.
weird.
But as far as the single tax corporation is concerned, whenever someone new leases that property or purchases that property, they get a new 99-year lease. And let's say someone was born on, let's say they were born 100 years ago. As soon as they hit 99 and they still live in that house, they get a new 99-year lease. But guess what? That probably wouldn't happen, because when the property is inherited, the heirs get a new 99-year lease.
Oh. Yeah.
So, you know, that lease is never going to run out, or somebody's going to have to move because their lease ran out.
Well, then
And
how
so
do they
that
pay the taxes? Don't they still pay taxes on that land?
they do and they don't. The property taxes, instead of paying property taxes, they pay the lease amount, which includes the property taxes
Oh,
plus some.
oh, okay.
So living in the Fairhope colony, your property taxes are a little bit, not a lot, a little bit, like maybe $50, $100, something like that, more than if you paid property taxes on your own property.
That's interesting.
And so what they do with that extra amount, other than run the corporation, is they do things for the community. It all goes back into the community, which is one of the things that has made Fairhope such a lovely place to live.
Yeah.
Because all of that land, all of those bayfront parks
Mm-hmm.
are owned, have been donated to Fairhope by the Single Tax Corporation.
So let me ask this: do you still get a tax assessment on the home, the improvements to the property? In other words,
You know, I have to be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I mean, I was always thinking, well, maybe they'll still like assess tax on the property, the improvements, I should say, to the property, but then the land.
I think
I'm assuming the colony pays a tax on that to the state or to the county or
it
whoever.
may even show as owned by a single tax corporation and
Oh.
paid by a single tax corporation. If you were to look up an address, I do not know.
Oh,
I do not know
Oh.
the answer to that.
Right.
But what is germane to us being real estate agents is just to make sure that your people understand that they're not paying property taxes, that they're going to pay a tiny amount more. If you want to get into that conversation with them, you don't have to get into that conversation with them.
Yeah.
Because, and here's why you don't. They're going to go through their own orientation at Single Tax Corporation.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the important thing for you as an agent to know. You need to know how to find out whether it's colony property or not. Well, if it's listed, it's going to tell you whether it's colony property or not. There is a map that you can look up. There are actually several maps that you can look up online showing where the Single Tax Corporation property is in Fairhope. Okay, there are a lot of them. Just Google it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the important thing that you need to know. You have to do some things, very few things, and your buyer has to do some things, or your seller has to do some things. So your buyer has to go through an orientation meeting and has to be approved, and that's really funny, the approval thing. But the Fairhope Single Tax Corporation used to be real snooty. They still can be, kind of, but they used to actually say they reserve the right to say who can move into their colony. This, I'm talking years ago, like in the 50s.
Yeah.
They can't do that anymore, and they approve everyone, but they make them go through this orientation thing. It's real simple. It's almost like just what I told you. All right. But they explain it to them.
Okay.
They have to schedule that in advance, and they only meet like once a month. So as soon as you have a buyer for a property in single tax, you need to call. If you're working with a buyer right now, you need to call the Single Tax Corporation and find out what is required for your buyer to do. So I'd go ahead and do that, just so you're knowledgeable about it when the time comes and they're ready to write an offer.
All right.
Okay. I don't think they can go through the orientation until they have a contract on something.
Does that colony, does that come with any kind of covenants and restrictions?
I'm sure it does,
Yeah.
but I don't know what they are.
Okay.
You know, it's basically right now, everything is, I would say that Fairhope's building codes and Fairhope's restrictions are probably more strict than what it would be. And let me go back, I can answer that. every subdivision that has covenants and restrictions records them, whether they are in the colony or not. Like Quail Creek has its own covenants. And so you have to live up to the the subdivision covenants.
Right.
But for the single tax corporation, they're going to have them sign something at that orientation stating what they can't know. They're going to be advised what they can and can't do with property. They can improve it pretty much the way anybody would improve property. But there are certain things that they cannot do that are not set by the single tax corporation. They're set by the town of Fairhope. You can't build a new house in Fairhope with a guest house behind it, a separate guest house behind it.
So before someone makes an offer in that area, it would seem they would want to know what those things are, right?
Well, you would think, and that's why I would say call the single tax corporation, Marcus, and ask them that question. I've never had a reason to ask that, even though I have sold colony property before. I've never, I honestly don't know. I don't know that I ever sold a buyer property.
It's never really come up, huh? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that, but that's not true because I sold properties in Quail Creek. Actually, no, I never had a buyer in the colony. I only had sellers. And so I knew what sellers had to do. So sellers also have to fill out a form and get it before a property closes, they have to take it to the single tax corporation. And Marcus asked them about that too, because it's been years since I've sold a single tax. It's been years since I've sold anything. It's been over 5 years.
Okay.
So I don't know if they're still doing it the same way, but the single tax corporation doesn't change much.
Yeah.
So they probably are still doing it exactly the same way.
I bet you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but call them and ask what sellers have to do, and call them and ask what buyers have to do.
Okay.
Because since you've got buyers that are looking in that area, it's important for you to know on both sides. All right, just so you make sure the sellers do what they're supposed to do, and that nothing holds up a closing for you. Okay, let's get back to the contract, okay? All right, so let's go down to the new mortgage section, and I'm on page 2, number 2B, new mortgage. So are you with me right here?
Yep.
Okay. I forgot that you can see my screen, sorry. Okay, all right, so you're going to find out what kind of mortgage your folks want to do. And whether it's going to be conventional, FHA, VA, USDA, bank loan, or other. All right. Now, conventional, of course, is, you understand about conventional loans.
Yes.
FHA is advisable for people who don't have a lot of money for a down payment because they can get into a property with 3.5% down.
Okay. Right.
All right. And there are some properties, mainly HUD properties, that are for sale on the HUD website. HUD foreclosures. HUD foreclosures were always FHA loans that went bad, that got defaulted on. So FHA, in order to resell those properties, will do them at $100 down.
Yes.
Which is a pretty good deal for somebody who has no money. Okay, VA, that's you're going to have veterans who are going to purchase.
Oh, yeah.
USDA, all right, USDA, do you know about USDA loans?
Yeah, I do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you know that you can get into them with nothing down.
Yeah.
And that almost every area of Baldwin County is available for USDA loans, with the exception of Spanish Fort, Daphne, and Fairhope west of 181.
Okay.
Even Gulf Shores and Orange Beach are eligible for USDA loans. And there is no maximum income. Sorry, there is a maximum income. There is no maximum loan amount on a USDA home. The limits are based on income. Did you know that?
I've heard that. I don't recall it exactly, but we discussed it. I think Harry Brown brought it up.
Okay. So your USDA is important to know about, because if you stay in this business for any length of time, you're going to have people that are going to be getting USDA loans, and you're going to have people that you're even going to advise to get a USDA loan, because it's such a great thing for people who don't have a lot of down payment money, and they can do it and avoid private mortgage insurance, PMI.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, if you get a conventional loan and you don't put 20% down, you're going to have to pay PMI payments. But if you get a USDA, you can do it with nothing down and no PMI. And so it's actually really good for like a single person, because the single income amount, 1 to 4 people living in the house, that the maximum I'm sorry, not for a single person, but for a house that will have 1 to 4 people, the maximum income is $82,700.
Okay.
If there's going to be 5 to 8 people, and you don't need to remember this, but I'm just giving it to you to give you a basic idea.
Okay.
For a maximum of 5 to 8 people, the income could be $114,000.
All right.
But there is no maximum loan amount. So the maximum loan amount of a home is based on what the buyers can qualify for when they go to a lender.
Okay.
And a lot of lenders, most lenders, do USDA loans.
Okay.
Okay. Especially our lenders that we like to work with a lot, like our team meeting, our training room sponsors.
Yes.
Like Camille Wilkinson with
yeah.
The mortgage couple. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're going to put in, if they don't know, I mean, if they're, you can put in the purchase price right here minus whatever they plan to put down. So I've got an offer price of $350, but a mortgage amount of $280, or in the amount equal to 80%. You want to fill this out
as well. Okay.
Yes, because the loan is going to probably be less than that if there's, or more than that if there's counter offers.
I was going to say, you won't know exactly until everything's buttoned up.
Right. And so this is where you cover that. Okay.
Okay.
And you can actually draw lines through this if you don't want to put the exact amount, but you do need to fill this part out.
Yeah.
Because this also tells the seller how committed these people are, how much they're planning to put down. You know what I'm saying? Like the sellers have a right to know that.
Right.
All right. Now, interest rates, who knows? I mean, they're so low right now.
Well, I know.
Do not put market in here. You will sometimes find people put market in here, and they're opening up their buyers to anything. Okay. But don't let a buyer limit it too much either. Like right now, you know, they can get a mortgage at 3.9 if they're, you know, but you can go ahead and put 4 in here. You can put 4.5. You can put whatever. Just know what's reasonable. But quite frankly, I usually put in an entire mortgage point higher, because you don't know what their credit is. You don't know what a bank will have to get from them interest-wise to approve them.
But at the same time, the buyer has to be comfortable going up to that amount, right?
Yeah, the buyer has to be comfortable going up to that amount. And that's why it's good to have a mortgage calculator on your phone.
Yeah.
Google them, and you can find ones that you like. Mortgage, and you can find apps that you like.
Yeah, I was thinking Camille's got an app, I think.
Yeah, use Camille's app. That's a good one. There are quite a few of them out there. And you can plug in, what homeowners association amounts are per year. It figures all of that in, taxes, all of that.
Okay.
Insurance. All right. But anyway, so put in, right now I would put in 4%, maybe even 4.5 to be safe. But it's going down. We know it's not going to go up as long as coronavirus is out there.
No,
all right. Okay. Lenders will work with you really quickly to get the loan pre-qual letter. Now, do you know the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval letter?
Well, I haven't seen those letters, but I know the concept is different because the approval means you've been through the process and you know what you can qualify for.
Yeah. A pre-approval letter is a much more solid thing than a pre-qualification letter.
Yeah.
A pre-qualification letter is almost like, we like your name, and as long as you're not lying to us, we'll write the letter.
Yeah. Assuming what you're telling us is true, we haven't vetted anything yet, you can qualify for this.
Right. But a pre-approval letter takes a few extra days because your buyer needs to provide a lender with, you know, whatever they're asking for, bank stubs, you know, tax forms, whatever they want.
Right.
They've got to do a credit approval. And so, so a pre-approval is a stronger thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for the purpose of this contract, it says loan pre-qualification letter.
Yeah.
Go ahead and get your buyers when they first start looking, get them to get pre-approved, because a lot of sellers, you know, we've been in a market where sellers haven't even wanted to see offers from people who weren't pre-approved.
Yeah.
So it's just part of the process. Go ahead and get them to get pre-approved and tell them, you know, in a hot market, which we are still in today, in a hot market,
Liz, can you hear me?
you're going to have multiple options.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
can hear you. I just got a notice saying my internet connection is unstable, Marcus.
That's fine. That's why I thought you froze there for a second. It's been fine now. You're fine now.
Just saying, get people pre-approved.
Okay. Can you hear me? If you can, you're frozen again.
Okay.
We lost the connection.
Let's see.
There you are.
Hey, okay. When that happens, just hang on, because we are having some sort of internet problem, apparently. So just hang on. I'll come back.
Okay.
By the way, will you text me your phone number?
I will.
I don't think I've got it already.
Let me put you. Let's see. You know what, Liz? I don't have yours in my phone.
Okay. What is your? Well, I'll tell you what. Let me just give it to you. Do you have something to write with?
Yeah, I sure do.
Okay. My number is 251
Mm-hmm.
367
Okay.
3602.
Okay. I thought I had you in mind.
Yeah, if you'll send me a text of your number, then I can call you. If if we lose connection, I can call you back, and I can call you when I've got connection again or something like that. We can communicate, in other words.
Okay.
Okay, good. I've got it. Marcus, hang on just a second. Let me save it.
Sure. You want to do the same thing.
Okay. All right. So let's get back to this because we've only gotten an hour left. And the first 2 pages are the most important pages. So I wanted to take some extra time with this, but once we get past these 2, we will we'll move a little faster. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. All right. So okay, so you need to get your buyers to understand that they must move quickly on everything. They do not have time to play around.
Yeah.
Lenders are great about getting a pre-qualification letter as soon as possible. If you've got lenders that they're working with, that you've referred them to and that they want to work with, you need to be in touch with that lender right away and say, we've got to get them approved within 5 days. Even if it's a Saturday, even if it's a Sunday, maybe don't call them, but send them a text and say, this is going on. If you want to talk about it today, you can call me. Most lenders are working on the weekends these days.
Yeah. Okay.
So don't be afraid to contact them. Okay.
Yeah, because I would tell you, I think like 4 out of my 7 are in that price range of like 150 to 200, which is pretty hot.
Yes.
Then I got a couple in that 400 to 500. Then I got the one guy that's looking in Fairhope at $1 million to 1.5.
You know, you sound like me when I first got started. I sold my first 2 houses. It was actually, I had a buyer for one house and then I turned around and sold their house. So I did that within a month after I first got started. And then I was working with tons of buyers. But there were like 7 of them that I was working with on a regular basis all the time. And I was continuing to pursue them too. I was maintaining hot pursuit, meaning I was staying in touch with them a lot. Trying to anyway.
That's something that I need to understand a little more, but I know it's off topic. But, you know, how often is often enough and all of that, you know?
Okay, so it's kind of depend. If you feel weird about calling them, like if you've called them, you know, if you've called them 3 times in a week for no reason, that 4th phone call may be kind of weird, you know. It's always good to have a reason to call them.
Right.
But if you haven't heard from them in a while and you think you should be hearing from them, don't hesitate to call them and just say, hey, just doing a status check, just checking to see what's going on. I had one guy, oh my gosh, he was like so reluctant to talk to me, even though I felt like he wanted to use me. But if I didn't call him, I knew that relationship would go away. It was almost like a reluctant boyfriend, you know. It was like I had to keep calling him going, now, have you seen anything else that you like? Do you want me to show you anything? Do you want me to be looking for anything else? Hey, I just found this house that fits your criteria and I really thought you might be interested in it. You know, those kinds of calls. I'd say twice a week is not too much. And depending on what you've got going on, if you've got, you know, you're actively searching for things for them, you've got a reason to stay in touch with them. If you let them slip too far, they're going to slip away.
Well, that's it. Like I have one of them says, well, just looking, but then they've been on the website like 3 different times looking. So I'm thinking they're a little more serious than just looking, I hope.
Yeah. So, yeah, but they may just like to look.
That's true. I know. I mean, some of this could be just because I know there's one of them that we were talking about that the price range they were looking at was just a little too wide. So it makes me think, okay, they're not really serious yet. They're just messing around.
I wouldn't assume that anyone is not serious because if they're looking, they're interested.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Why would they go on my website, registered, logged in, and started searching, and I can see what they've been looking at? Why would they have done that? So. Okay,
now there are some people who are real estate junkies, and I speak from experience because I was one.
Yeah.
And I had good websites that I could go to and look at, and I had to register for a couple of them, and I would put in bogus phone numbers and stuff just because I wanted to look at the properties on their site. There are people like that, but the reason I was doing it wasn't just that I love real estate, and I do love real estate. I love looking at real estate. It wasn't just that. I also knew that eventually I was going to be a buyer. And most people who are looking that much, it may be a year, it may be 2 years, you still stay in touch with them. And the more you're in touch with them, the more you're going to build a relationship with them. Just have a reason to call them every time you call them, a good reason.
Okay. Yeah.
Not just, I saw you were looking at properties on my website, because you don't want them to scare them away from your website.
Okay.
But something like, I know you're looking, and I know you're just looking, and that is perfectly fine. Look as much as you want on my website. That is perfectly fine. However, I want you to know that interest rates are now taking an even further jump south. We don't know how long this is going to last. It is very dependent on what's going on in our economy right now, and we're trying to save this country. And that's why the Fed is cutting rates even further. But this is about as low as it's going to get, and we don't know how long this is going to last. So if you really are serious about buying, I just wanted to let you know that situation and make sure you are aware of it.
Do you think people are expecting prices to decline because of this? Because
Yes.
I don't see it. It's not like it was in 08, 09. It's nothing like that.
Not yet. But this situation is going to get worse. And I think it's probably going to get possibly a lot worse. And if businesses start closing, and they will, if this is a true pandemic, which everybody is saying it really will be, in that instance, if we're like Italy, and Italy is
Lockdown?
Yeah, and they're saying we're going to be like Italy. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, is that our path is going to be a lot like Italy's path, but possibly even worse because we haven't reacted as quickly maybe as we should have. Well, if that happens, we're going to have people like my hairdresser going out of business. We're going to have people like, waiters and waitresses who depend on these restaurants to provide their living. We're going to have a lot of that sort of thing, and that's going to affect our economy, and that's going to affect our home prices.
You're right. It's going to drag it down.
So do I think we're going to have a recession? I absolutely do. I don't think it's a question of if. I think it's just a matter of when. Did you watch Gary Keller's broadcast?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I lived
concept. Yeah. I know he's trying to pump us up too.
Well, he's trying to pump us up, but I think he's being real too. This is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't assume, I've heard him say for years, a recession is coming, winter is coming, get ready. It's coming. Be ready. And when he said that yesterday about we should have already been in a recession, this is just going to drive us there, because our economic situation could not sustain. We could not stay where we were. And when you've got houses that are selling for more than they should sell for, like just over the last year, we've had this crazy inflation stuff in housing prices. When you start seeing that, having lived through it before, that's a big sign that it's about to turn.
I just don't see the bubble like we had. I mean, obviously I was in California and it went nuts, and then it just burst, and then.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have that necessarily, but this is uncharted territory. We really don't know how badly we're going to be affected.
No, I agree. We've never had like this.
If people want to sell a house, they sure better get it on the market now, because prices will drop. So if you've got any prospective sellers that are thinking of selling or need to sell, they need to go ahead and get their house on the market now.
Yeah.
Like now.
Right now. Yeah.
Right now, because prices will go down, Marcus, but in a few months they're going to go down. If this keeps going, they're going to drop. And when the dropping starts, it starts pretty fast. right now we're in the really right in the very beginning, and there are still buyers out there looking,
Yeah.
and you know, who still need to buy. I mean, there'll always be people who not need to buy a home. But when that buyer, you know, if the buyers start to get a hint, and they will, because the media will let them know,
Mm-hmm.
when they start getting a hint that prices are dropping, they're going to hold.
Yeah.
They're going to wait.
Yeah, they're going to wait.
Yeah. So if you've got sellers who are thinking of selling, they need to sell right now and be prepared for anything. Okay, back to the contract, because we now have like 48 minutes, 49 minutes. So let's move forward. Okay. All right. So okay. So when they've got a mortgage, okay, on this contract, and you already know this, I'm sure, because you said you've already been through a contracts class.
Mm-hmm.
You know that it has these places on here where it says, you know, 20 days, business days if left blank. You've got a lot of these places in here.
Right. Now,
I
notice you fill in the 20 anyway, don't you?
I do, because I don't like blanks. It goes back to my.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It goes back to my thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now, what this is saying right here, mortgage terms as described in this paragraph shall not be delayed, extended, otherwise affected by disclosure requirements of CFPB. Okay, what that's saying is you're not going to have extra time, Mr. Buyer, to deal with all the stuff that the lender is going to ask you for. Go ahead and be ready to get it to them immediately. As quickly as they ask for it, be ready to get it to them. Don't delay, because you're not going to have extra time to pull all this stuff together. You know, make sure you get it to them. Seller financing, that's a whole different deal. You know, when you get into that, hopefully by then you will have already had enough training in seller financing or in financing to know. And when sellers finance a loan, finance a home,
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot of different forms. There are like 4 or 5 different ways a seller can do that. They can do a lease purchase. They can do a extended payment plan. There are different things that they can do. And so, you know, but if you've got seller finance, obviously you would check there.
Okay.
All right, appraisal. Now, again, with cash, they're probably going to say it's not subject to property appraising for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But right here in number 3, it says, if the offer is subject to property appraising for at least the purchase price and the property does not appraise for at least the purchase price, seller is to be notified in writing, including a copy of the appraisal within 20 business days. Okay. Following acceptance date of this agreement. So what that also means is that the lenders need to go ahead and get that appraisal offered quickly. And when you have an offer and it's been accepted, and you have the buyer, get it to the bank immediately. Get the contract to the bank immediately and let them know the appraisal needs to be done fast enough to get a copy of it to the seller within 20 days.
Now, is it the mortgage company that's going to order that appraisal? The
Yes.
title mortgage. Okay.
Mortgage company.
Yeah.
So it's up to the mortgage company to move fast on getting the appraisal. It used to be that mortgage companies would drag their feet on the appraisal because they didn't want to order the appraisal unless they felt like the contract was going to close. No, they need to do it right away.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, and also it's to the advantage of your buyer that they do it right away, and the seller, because the seller's taking their house off the market. And the buyer they just need to know. So their life's not put on hold for this particular property. Now,
Quick question. After there's an acceptance, the listing agent has to go in and change the status of the property, correct?
Uh-huh.
And what is the new status? Pending?
Yes.
Contract pending, or is it?
But it may be under contingency too.
Okay.
Because if there's a 24-hour or 48-hour first right of refusal,
Oh, okay.
all right, if
Yeah.
there's a contingency on a property selling, it's usually going to be with a first right of refusal. And we have forms for that, by the way.
Okay.
Um,
You mean
and
if there's another offer that comes in? Is that what
okay, so here's how those work. All right. So if you have a buyer and they have a home to sell, their home
Oh, I see.
can be on the market or not on the market. You would do this as an addendum to the purchase agreement, okay? And it would be presented at the same time. So if you've got a buyer that has a home to sell,
Mm-hmm.
and they're out looking at property and they call you and they say, Marcus, we love this house, but we still have to sell our house. What can we do? You can make an offer contingent on the sale of their property.
Yes. Okay.
But what you can say to them, if it's not already on the market, and this can help you get a listing, you can say, now I need to be if we're going to do this, I need to be your listing agent because I have a vested interest in helping you get your property sold.
That's right. And we can overstate those.
And so, but I have to have some control over this process. So I need to be your agent if you're going to do this first right of refusal. They're not always going to let you do that, but it's worth a try. Anything to, and what you've just said is the truth. That another agent is not going to be as motivated to get this sold as you will be, because you got two deals depending on it, not just one.
Mm.
Okay, now let's go on down to, now if a property does not appraise, all right, and I've had this happen.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the seller's willingness to wait and the buyer's willingness to keep paying appraisal prices and our appraisal fees and credit report fees. But if a house doesn't appraise, because appraisers sometimes you can have 5 appraisers and they can be very different.
I've heard there's one particular appraiser that's somewhat problematic, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it came up the other day on one of our discussions.
Yeah. I don't know who that is. I can know there used to be an inspector that if he inspected a property, it was not going to it was going to blow the deal.
Yeah.
His last name was Sullivan, not Sullivan.
You're not talking about Stoops?
Remember his name? I don't even think he's in the business anymore.
Okay.
But you learn who these people are.
Oh, I know. I'm getting that. The more I'm around, when these vendors come in and talk to us, that you get the sense that there are those you can work with and those that are a little more difficult.
And I used to be a listing broker for HUD. And when I was doing that, HUD had an appraiser that we had to work with all the time. This was their appraiser that they used on almost every deal that they did. And that appraiser most of the time, she was close to what I had listed the property for, close to what I thought the property should list for.
Uh-huh.
But there were times that I was like, what are you drinking? Because she was either so low and it could go either way with her. She could be really high. And I'm like, you're not even in the ballpark. And so supposedly appraisals are more accurate. And when I was with HUD, they did a study at one point to determine who was closer to the actual selling price, whether it was the listing agent or the appraiser. And it ended up being the listing agent more than the appraiser. But there's still all this credibility given to appraisers because they go through school to learn how to do it. So anyway, all right. But okay, so if it doesn't appraise,
Mm-hmm.
your buyer can go to a different lender if the seller agrees to extend, or they can go to 2 lenders but the seller has to understand that this is happening.
Is there a form that is required for that the seller agrees to extend for X days?
Put it on an addendum to the purchase contract.
Okay.
We have that in our documents.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Buyer and seller cost. Okay. This kind of lays out exactly what the buyer is going to pay for and what the seller is going to pay for. Okay. Now, when you do your estimate of closing costs for a buyer, and that's a different class. I know it said I was going to do that. That was wrong. John Kimbrough is doing that.
Okay.
I
thought so on Friday, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I saw something yesterday that said he was doing something completely different, but my understanding is he's doing, and I confirmed with him yesterday that he's going to do buyer and seller closing costs.
Oh.
So,
class he's doing on marketing through Paradigm, I think it is.
Okay, then that,
Maybe that's where it came from. Yeah, I've got him down for net sheets at 9 and Paradigm marketing at 10.
Okay, good. Because I asked him if he was planning on covering, and I said to him, since you've got your class coming up, I'm just not going to cover this because you're going to cover it, right? And he said, right.
Okay.
So I'm assuming he's still planning on doing that net sheets class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what they have right here is what is typical in our area for buyer cost and for seller cost. Okay. Now you see right here where it says owner's title insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do you understand the difference between mortgagee's title insurance and owner's title insurance, or do you want me to explain it?
I don't think that's come up.
Okay. All right. So when a home is sold, the mortgage company wants the buyer to pay for title insurance to cover their risk in the loan.
Right.
In doing the loan. Okay, the seller and the buyer typically pays for that. The seller typically pays for the owner's title insurance. In other words, they're guaranteeing by having this insurance, they're ensuring that they are passing on a marketable title.
Oh, I see. So the two really don't go hand in hand necessarily.
No. Now, let me back up. It used to be in this area, I'm talking about in Baldwin County and Mobile. Okay. It used to be that the seller paid both in one lump, in one policy.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
The seller used to do that.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that what this says right here?
No.
The warranty deed?
Look under buyer cost. Buyer to pay for closing agent settlement, recording fees.
Oh, I see.
Any mortgagee's title insurance premiums required by a lender. Okay. So that means that if they sign off on this, and this has become what is typical here now, if they sign off on this, they are saying that they're going to pay the title insurance for the lender. The seller, who used to pay that as well, but now the seller only pays for the owner's title insurance policy. Those are
providing protection for the amount of the mortgage. Is that the difference? I mean,
okay. So the buyer is paying for a title insurance policy to protect the lender.
Okay.
The seller is paying for a title insurance policy to protect the buyer. What that title insurance policy is guaranteeing or is ensuring is that the title is marketable.
Right. Well,
that there are no clouds on the title.
Now, see, I was thinking that when the buyer pays for a mortgage title insurance premium, policy, whatever, in that process of obtaining that policy, they would make sure the title was clear and free of any encumbrances.
They do, and they're usually done at the title company usually does both of them.
Yeah.
And it's handled at closing who pays for what.
Okay.
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 But you know, they are two different policies.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right.
One for the new owner and one for the lender.
Okay.
But they're generally done by the title company. And that's why they're called title companies, because they check titles, but they also provide title insurance.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Now, most title companies, when they do title insurance, most of the fees for their title insurance are going to be the same, no matter what title company it is, because there's like one company that seems to do this. And so they all apparently get that insurance provided by whoever the final contractor is that does that insurance. So if you get a rate card showing, like, if the house costs this amount, the title insurance is going to be this amount.
Okay.
Did you ask Jen if she needs us to freeze anything for her or anything?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so if there's a title insurance rate card that you get from one company, like let's say it's Stewart Title or Clear Title or whoever you get it from, you're going to use that for your estimated closing costs for your buyer or your seller. So that rate card is not going to change. Those rates aren't going to change from company to company. You follow me?
So if you get it from one, you can pretty well use that rate for any of it.
Yes.
Okay,
when you're doing your estimated closing costs. Yes. Now, their fees will change though. The title company, whatever their closing fee is, they can change that because they're going to stay competitive with that. But most of them are getting their title insurance from those rates pretty much stay the same.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that title, I mean, just for the estimate of the net sheet, is that something we should have in hand now, or is that something that really?
It's a good thing to go ahead and get it. Yeah. You kind of get a feel for it, frankly. I mean, for some reason, title companies didn't have these things printed up a lot. I mean, some of them would, but a lot of them didn't. And so I went for like a year and a half before I ever even got a title fee card from anybody.
Okay.
And so I just got used to kind of knowing, you know, after a few closings, you start to kind of get a feel for how much is this going to cost? You know, but you can always ask. I mean, you can even ask me, Marcus, if you ever want to call me and just ask me or send me a text.
Okay.
Now, I'm not that up on that one, though. I can tell you that like that's something, because I just haven't sold, you know, many houses lately. I know that it used to be, if you had a house that was around $250,000, you could count on your insurance, your title insurance, the whole thing, owners and mortgages, being about $2,000.
Okay.
But you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know now. And you know, Danita will be happy to help you with that. John Kimbrough would be a good one to ask.
I'm sure John will talk about that on Friday.
Yeah. Okay, now let's go down to included with property. Okay. This is real simple. I mean, it kind of outlines what, you know, what generally stays.
Yeah.
All right. So right here, fill in all of these blanks.
Okay.
With a will or a will not. All right. Don't leave any of them blank.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, and then right down here is where you're going to put any exceptions to what won't convey. You put it right here. And then this is where you put, you know, like if something's going to stay that normally wouldn't stay, you put it right here.
So in other words, if it's not obvious from the check boxes, you're spelling it out, like the chandelier.
Yeah.
That normally being permanently attached, it would convey, but okay, we're making an exception.
Right. And and so right up here, it does say including but not limited to, and they actually do have pool equipment cover, you know, but I just came down here and said all pool cleaning and maintenance equipment to convey. So there was no misunderstanding.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But read, it's really important to read this stuff. It's really important to know these contracts
Yeah.
and know them well, so that when you're having a conversation with someone, you can, and they say, well, will the garage doors automatically, the openers automatically stay? They should.
They should.
Right here. But see, here, it's right here in the contract. And if you know your contract, you're going to know that.
But then
They
again,
have
I've
to
got those
be.
little buttons that control those garage door openers. Sometimes they get lost or they end up in somebody's car and they forgot about it.
Yeah, well, but then the buyer could come back and say, the seller can come back and say, well, I don't have them,
That's right. That's right. Go buy another one and program it. No big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah. All right. So,
Liz, let me ask you this, the general thing. In a buyer's consultation, let's say you're sitting down to talk to somebody that haven't been through this process before. Do you kind of walk them through this agreement and talk a little bit about what's going to happen with each of these, or is that just way too much?
for the most part, okay, so when I would touch on the important things.
Okay.
You can say all of it's important, but if you go through this item by item, it's going to take you 2 hours.
You're going to get overwhelmed too. Yeah. Okay.
You're going to get a feel for what your people want, and you can just come right out and ask them.
Okay.
And that's what I used to do. I finally got used to asking people, do you want to read over this and then ask me about anything that is of concern to you?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you want me to go through it line by line, which is going to take us 2 hours? What do you want me to do?
Okay.
And you can just ask them.
Yeah.
And then everybody's real clear on what's going to happen.
Well, it's kind of like that, the buyer's presentation, I've seen those that we have those forms that they can look a little bit overwhelming to people, but then I've seen other ones where they say, I keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah. And so, I finally got to the point where I would hand it to them and say, I'd like for you to read this over. Now, my question to you is, will you please let me know if you have things that concern you? And if it is important to you that we read over this line by line, we can do that.
Okay.
But it's going to take us 2 hours. So, and so that's what I would do. All right. And it's kind of like this class, we're going through this actual purchase agreement, but you have had questions about these things. Well, if you've got a buyer that tends to ask questions or wants to ask questions, it's going to take this kind of time. You can see right here, this is a really good example of how that goes.
Yeah, you're right. Someone like me that, I'm a CPA and I've got this kind of penchant for detail. You have to walk me through the darn thing. But other than that, people I don't want to hear all that.
Yeah, right. And that, I had one closing where I had a former judge. He was a retired judge.
Mm-hmm.
He was a little bit of a nut, and he was the buyer, not the seller. I had normal people as sellers, but the buyer was
eccentric,
very eccentric, retired judge.
Yeah.
And when we went to closing, he insisted on reading every single word of every page. The closing agent was a very experienced closing agent. And she said, if you do this, we'll be here 3 hours. And it depends on how fast you read and how many questions you have. And he said, well, I've got to read it all. So we sat there for 3 hours while he read everything. And so if they don't sign it, they're not going to buy the house. But they do have a right to know what they're signing. So if, you can ask them to read it, and if they don't understand anything, to ask you about it.
Okay.
But if they want you to go through, if they want you to go through it all, or you can even say, do you want me to hit the high points?
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I get it.
You'll get comfortable with it, but
okay.
It can take a long time if you go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
All right. Now, buyers are responsible for paying for pretty much every inspection. All right. Now, I put 12 business days in here just because that gives your buyer another couple of days. When they put these things in here, right here, Marcus,
Mm-hmm.
when they put these in here where it says 10 business days if left blank or whatever,
Yeah.
that's what's kind of typical. What is the industry norm?
Mm-hmm.
But you put whatever you need to put for your buyer. Okay. Okay. Now here's the thing. The inspection period not only includes time to have the inspection, it includes time for you to write to the buyer and notify them in writing what the buyer wants to have happen.
Okay.
Okay. So if the buyer wants some repairs done, and try to encourage your buyers, this is not about small cosmetic things.
Mm-hmm.
This is for things that you feel must be repaired for you to agree to purchase this home. And the cleaner a contract is, and the less people ask for, the more likely it will be accepted.
Yep.
Okay. Now, this is also a good time to have this conversation with your buyer. And I'm going to tell you something that most agents will never do, but it is really helpful in dealing with your customers when they make an offer. You can say, you can ask for thousands of dollars off of the asking price now, or you can wait until the inspection comes through and see what needs to come off the asking price at that time for repairs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you're probably not going to get both. So if you're asking for a reduced price right now, Mr. Buyer, then don't expect to get much when the inspection results come in.
Yeah, if you show your hand up front, that's a great point. Yeah.
Right. So, it's an either or thing. It is likely not going to be both. Now, if they sell a property and you get a good amount of money off of the asking price,
Mm-hmm.
when the inspection comes through, it's still better to ask for money rather than to ask for them to repair things.
Yeah.
It just keeps it simple. Because when you have repairs, now you can, if they want to ask for repairs, they can ask for repairs,
Mm-hmm.
But if they do the repairs and you go through the walkthrough and it's not done to the satisfaction of the buyer, then you got to deal with that. Are you going to hold up a closing to make sure these things are done properly? Or is it better to just get a credit so that you can have it done to your satisfaction? I think money's easier. That's my opinion. Can you hear me, Marcus?
Yeah, I can now. My son ran into this with a seller, a buyer, I should say, that walked through, everything looked fine. But then after the seller moved out, they were upset because there were some move out kind of dings and bangs and damages and little holes where the paintings were and stuff. And they got all wound up about that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that's a total overreaction. That
Yeah.
you don't anticipate that.
Yeah. No. I mean, yeah.
I thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah. It is ridiculous. And so you need to prepare your buyers. A home is not going to be in brand new construction state.
Well, and I think that's something that probably should have been set up front. It's kind of one of those things, I think.
But a lot of agents never say that, and they kind of assume people know that.
I know.
But some people expect it to be in perfect condition.
Yeah.
It is a resale home. It is not new construction. It will not be. And when you're asking for repairs based on an inspection,
Mm-hmm.
we're not asking for rusted doorknobs to be repaired.
Yeah.
We're not asking for nail holes to be filled.
Right.
We are asking for systems and structures, things that are health and safety issues, you know, a roof that has 2 years of expected life, you know, an air conditioner that's on its last leg, those kinds of things. That's what you're looking for, the big stuff. You don't really ask for the nitty gritty stuff. I mean, they can.
But as the buyer then, they get a list of this stuff. Say that the inspection reveals the AC's on its last leg. Are you saying the buyer should more reasonably expect some sort of an allowance that upon failure, they can go out and replace it? Or
Yes, rather than asking them to replace it.
Okay.
Yeah. And also get the sellers to pay for a home warranty.
Yeah.
You know, that'll reduce their liability in a lot of ways. Especially if they didn't put something on a seller's disclosure. You know, I mean, the seller's disclosure covers a lot of stuff, but a lot of sellers don't want to sign a seller's disclosure.
I know. You know, it's always it's always that fear of the unknown that people worry about.
Well, you know, there are two ways of looking at things. You know, seller's disclosures in a lot of people's minds, like Don Mays swears that a seller's disclosure is what's going to protect a seller if anything comes up after closing.
Yeah.
I say if something comes up after closing, you know, that wasn't on the seller's disclosure. I mean, we're in a buyer beware state. We are not in a seller beware state. We're in a buyer beware state. And I think it is up to a buyer to do their due diligence and have an inspector. So I don't like seller's disclosures myself. I think it creates more liability in some ways, because if something happened and something goes wrong with the heater or with whatever, the buyer, if nothing was put on the seller disclosure form about the heater, they could come back and say, well, you should have known.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, well, how am I supposed to know? I didn't have that looked at. I'm sorry. But
right. And so I'm not a fan.
I don't really like that form, but if that's what the agency wants us to do, I'll respect that.
Well, no, quite frankly, you can get away with not doing that. Okay. So just put, you know,
seller refused to sign.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you want to make sure it doesn't get kicked back to you. Yeah. But if Danita's doing it, I'm not doing it anymore. But when I was doing it, I've never held anybody to a seller's disclosure.
You think Danita will?
If Danita's doing it, I don't think she will either.
Okay.
I don't think Stacy will.
Yeah.
Now, Holly, you know, Holly's doing the screening right now, the pre-screening on compliance.
Yeah. Right.
She might come back and say you need a seller's disclosure, but I think she's almost gotten away from that too. So if you want to avoid that, though, just put a note in there, seller would not sign seller's disclosure or something like that. Now, Dawn, you know, just send them something saying they wouldn't sell it. They wouldn't sign it, or, you know.
He's going to follow more the corporate line, isn't he? I mean, he's going
to follow what he thinks should be the corporate line.
Okay.
Now, but he is our corporate broker.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so he's going to do what Don thinks is going to protect the company.
Well, and like you said, we're in a buyer beware state. There aren't that many states like this. So
no, there aren't.
Not everybody has to be exactly the same.
Right.
Right?
Right. All right, so we actually have 8 minutes, and we're on page 3.
Well, just go ahead and hit what you think's the highlight.
Okay, I will. I'm going to hit the things that I think.
I've done a lot of risk management.
Yeah. Okay. And I can tell you're the kind that's going to read the contract and you're going to know what's in it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the buyer is going to pay for the inspections, but the seller always has to have the utilities on for the inspections at their expense.
Utility bond? Okay.
The utilities need to be on for all inspections. And if the utilities are not on, it says right here, any connection fees required for inspections will be paid by seller.
Okay.
And I think it even says in here somewhere that the utilities will be on.
Yeah, I remember even when I sold the home in California, we had moved out and they weren't going to take possession for a while. And I thought about shutting certain utilities off. And then they're like, don't do that.
Yeah, and don't ever cut off your air conditioning, your
No,
HVAC.
Exactly.
You'll mess up the house. You'll end up with mold in the house. Yeah.
Exactly. It'll smell. And yes, I got you.
Yeah. Okay. So, so if it's in a floodplain, they for sure want flood insurance. Most homes in Baldwin County should probably have flood insurance.
Even if there, what's that X? Well, I got to ask you off the top of your head, that X. I see the X zone. Isn't that kind of an in between?
I don't really know about that.
Okay.
You're asking the wrong gal.
That's fine.
I don't really know about that.
Where I was in California, we were outside the 100-year floodplain areas, so it wasn't required. But
yeah,
no,
and it will be required if it's in the 100-year floodplain. But you know,
okay.
I still like flood insurance. I just do.
Well, even the basic FEMA policy is only $300 or $400 a year, right? So
yeah, it's cheap.
Yeah, that's right.
And
now, if you're down on the bay somewhere, that's a different story. It's going to cost you. But.
Yeah, but if you have a rain like we've never had before, and you know water starts coming in the back of the house, it can't, you know, because you got a level yard, and all of a sudden your yard can't absorb any more water.
I had that in California. My pool overflowed, and my wife and I were using squeegees trying to keep water out of the back of our house. It came up about 4 inches. I couldn't believe my eyes.
Yeah, yeah. And you never ever thought it would flood, right?
No, never.
And then it did.
But we had this, the decking all around the pool was this Bowmanite, which is like a stamped concrete decorative. And the water just, I thought it was graded properly, but it flowed right toward our house. It was crazy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
How fun that was not.
No.
Right?
Not.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, so a flood insurance policy can be transferred to the buyer.
Oh.
Okay. And it gets the premiums are prorated through closing. So that's how that works. All right. Any expenses though involved in that are the responsibility of the buyer. Okay, I'm going to speed through. Okay.
Yep,
the internet thing is kind of self-explanatory.
Yeah, I know.
It's the buyer's responsibility to check that out, not the seller to provide any proof on that. Okay, this is something that has changed since I was selling property. The buyer is now required to do, they're not required to do, but they're required to pay for it. The WIR, the wood infestation report.
Yes.
It should be done by a bonded and licensed pest control company of the buyer's choice, stating that a visual inspection of accessible areas showed no infestation. If your buyers get a WIR and they get a contract, it needs to include Formosan termites.
Okay.
Okay. The seller will have to pay for, according to this offer, the seller will have to pay for any repairs at their expense.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, then how quickly can all that happen? That sounds like an awful lot to happen.
No, these termite companies act quickly.
Okay.
They know it's a time-sensitive issue.
Okay.
Okay. If and WIRs aren't that hard to get. You just call them and say, I need to get a, and they're like Knockout, by the way. Knockout is a really good company.
What's it called? Knockout?
Knockout.
All right.
Knockout Pest Control, I think is the name of the company.
Okay. I don't think they're on my vendor list, but
they should be. They're good. Knockout. Southeastern is a good one.
Okay.
But you'll find several more. There are more on our vendors list. I know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've uploaded some of those into Homekeeper, and I'm doing invitations to some of those vendors to try to build some relationships. But.
Yeah. Okay, now on the termite inspection report deal,
Right.
the party who is responsible for the cost of repairs, and see, you put in here who's going to be doing the repairs, okay? Most of the time it's the seller. But whoever is responsible for the repairs and has agreed to be responsible for the repairs has the right to terminate the contract if the cost of the repairs is too much.
Okay. Wow.
If they say, I'm not doing that, you know, the buyer could go ahead, I guess, if the seller said, not paying it, the buyer can either buy the house or not. But
Okay.
the seller would have the ability to say, nope, I'm done. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. It is the sole responsibility of the buyer to obtain a new termite wood infestation contract for retreatment. It cannot be transferred. You used to be able to transfer a termite contract.
Is that contract required to close?
No. Now, it used to be that a wood infestation report was required. I would always, always, always encourage my buyers to get one. And I would always also encourage my sellers to have their house checked before they put it on the market. You still there, Marcus?
I am, yes.
Okay. All right, so systems and components, fixtures, whatever. All
So
right.
you're saying that a listing agreement, you should tell the seller, get an inspection done on this wood infestation.
Yes, I'm saying, yeah. If I were them before I put a house on the market, I would have my house inspected.
Okay.
All right, especially if they don't have a contract. And why, good grief, would you not have a contract? But it happens.
Okay.
Okay, systems and components and fixtures. Okay, this really just refers to heating, cooling, air conditioning, including window units, plumbing, electrical systems, and all of the included appliances that are staying in the house should be in working order. Proper, I wish that word would just come out. Proper working order, that means they're working as they should.
Mm-hmm.
You know, an oven should not heat. Let me change that. A stove. On the top of a stove, all of the burners should be working. And they should be working, you know, they should heat up as they should. They should heat hot enough to cook. That means proper working order. They're working as they should.
Do inspectors check that stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So they must have some objective way to determine what constitutes working order?
Oh, no, I don't know how they check check
That's
that.
it's a pretty subjective thing,
But it's also saying, hey, when this thing closes, these things need to be working.
yeah.
And if they're not working, you're going to have to, you know, the seller has some responsibility there. The seller does warrant. Now, here, the seller has the ability to check does not, or you have the ability to say the seller doesn't warrant that.
Wow.
Okay? But then that's the red flag, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, home warranty. If the property is covered by an existing home warranty, the warranty is to be transferred to the buyer at closing if transferable. Most of them aren't, because most of them are only for a year period.
Yeah.
You know, and most of the time, by the time, if they've gotten it renewed, which most people don't, but if they've gotten it renewed, there's usually not that much time left on it, you know. But sometimes there's a brand new one, so it does transfer.
Mm-hmm.
If the warranty company will let it transfer.
Yeah, I don't think not all of them are assumable, I don't think.
All right. And warranty companies change, so keep up with that. Now, I can't figure out how to notate on the contract online how to check buyer or seller here.
Oh, yeah, I see it.
I can't make it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, there needs to be a little fillable box or something there, doesn't it?
Yeah. I don't know how you do that.
Okay.
So before you send it to somebody, you might print it and check it. You know, I just don't. Somebody else needs to answer that because I can't figure out how you autofill that.
Okay.
All right. And I would put 600, not 500, because they've gone up in price.
Well,
So
I was going to say, depending on where you're at, Liz, I mean, in California, there were a lot more than that.
yeah, so,
Depends
you
on
know,
the cost.
it's important to know it. It's 500 because that was, you can still get them for that, but I would put 600.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Buyer is solely responsible for selection of home warranty company. You know, I personally, I mean, if I was the seller and I wanted to choose the home warranty company, I would put a note in here under, you know, somewhere other provisions or whatever. But, you know, the buyer really, I mean, for them to choose it is a good thing because it cuts down on the liability of the seller. Hey, you
Absolutely.
sold me a warranty company and I can't get them to do anything, you know?
Yeah, there's all kinds of differences in them. I've gone through 3 different ones out in California, and I had people that came to do repairs tell me some of them are really crappy. They don't cover anything.
Yeah.
They'll fight you tooth and nail.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Lead-based paint.
All right.
Lead-based paint, number 13, page 4. Okay. Requires that for all residential buildings built prior to 1978, that means 1977 or earlier, buyer is required to be given disclosure of information on the lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards. Okay. Now, what that means is if the property was built before 1978, first of all, you got to check in here. All right.
Right.
But there needs to be disclosure. And that's the disclosure. It was built prior to 78. That's it right there. But it's also a very, very good idea. It used to be law. It's not law anymore. But it used to be a law that a seller had to give to a buyer, and usually it was the real estate companies that did this, have to give a copy of a pamphlet called Lead-Based, Protect Your Family from Lead-Based Paint in the Home. And it was a pamphlet.
Yeah.
It's still out there. You can print it. I don't know if we have any copies at the office, but you can print it easily online. Just look it up, Google it. It's everywhere. It's easy to find.
Okay.
Okay. Make sure on every page that the seller and the buyer initial at the bottom.
Right.
That's the second most missed part on the contract.
That's fundamental to any contract I've ever done, though. You've got to get those initials on every page.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Okay. Title insurance conveyance. The seller shall cause an ALTA commitment for title insurance and the amount of the purchase price be provided at closing at the seller's expense. Closing shall be at location of seller's election unless otherwise noted here. All right, so what they're talking about has already been referred to when we were talking about title insurance above. They're talking about the homeowner's title insurance that the seller is providing for the buyer to prove that they are passing on a marketable title, to insure the title from clouds on the title. So that is the owner's title insurance, and it costs more than the one that the buyer has to pay for it for the mortgage company, but that costs a whole lot less than what the seller's part does. The seller's is the part that's going to be around $2,000 on a $250,000 home. And that is why the seller gets to choose where the closing takes place. Because the title company that does the closing is the title company that's going to provide the title insurance. So that's why the seller gets to choose that, because they're the one paying for that title insurance. You follow me?
Yeah.
Okay. And then right here, title is to be taken in the name of. An alias can be used but they need to buy it and sell it in that name. So you can buy it in the name of an LLC, or you can buy it in an alias. Some people don't want let's say.
Well, if your birth name was Vicky, my wife's birth name, but she likes to be called Victoria, that's an alias. Victoria is. I think it's that kind of concept, right?
Yes, but also it is also, and James, are you on here?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hey, James.
How's it going?
You've been on here all along, haven't you? For a while.
And
I'm
when I
sorry.
first got on, I didn't yeah.
It just clicked into my brain. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I didn't know.
And we're about to wind up because we're over time now. We're about to wind up. So I'm just kind of running through this real quickly to the end. All right.
Yeah, I got most of it, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Most of it.
So, what were we just saying? Okay, aliases. All right. So let's say that there was a buyer who was buying a house next door to where he grew up as an investment property, but he didn't want the neighbors to know it was him buying it because his mother didn't get along with the lady across the street or whatever. They can take it in an alias. And if they are buying it in the name of a trust, the trust name would go here.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, I don't know if y'all have heard of 1013 exchanges. Do you know what those are?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So in a case of that, it's going to be taken in the name of something like the Liz Bloodworth Trust, Liz Bloodworth Living Trust, or something like that. Okay. And it's going to be done. And in a case like that, there's going to be an exchange company that they're going to use to hold the property until they find a replacement property or whatever. And that exchange company is going to advise them what trust to put that in, or an attorney's going to. So your buyer's going to know what name it needs to go in.
Right. If they're trying to do a 1031 exchange, yeah. Yeah,
1031 exchange. But you know what? On a and if an investor is buying it, they're probably going to put it in the name of an LLC.
Probably, yeah.
Okay. With or without right of survivorship. A lot of people don't even know what this means. If you're married and the wife is on the deed, or if there's a partner on the deed, put with right of survivorship. Okay? But it's only if there is someone who is on the deed, like a marital partner or a partner. You understand what I'm saying? Now, if a single person is buying this property, or a married person is buying this property, but they're not putting the spouse on the deed, and they do want that spouse to inherit the property, they need to get them on the deed. But I also would put with right of survivorship. But the truth is, I don't think it'll matter if they're not on the deed. So they just need to get them on the deed if they want them to inherit, or they need to put it in a will. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's
but if there's a co-owner of this property, needs to be survivorship on here, because otherwise, do y'all know what can happen?
Tenancy in common.
Well, what can happen is, let's say there's a daughter or a son.
Yeah.
They can inherit the buyer's part, and the partner will have to own this house with the son.
Yep.
See what I'm saying?
Yep.
So this is important right here.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Property taxes. Okay, let me make this real simple. And this says it right here. if there are assessments that are due before closing, the seller pays them. If they're due after closing, the seller doesn't pay them. All right. And it says, if any portion of property is assessed under current use classification, any rollback or other additional assessment levied against property as a result of this sale shall be paid by, I would say, seller. But the seller may balk at that and come back and say, no, it's got to be the buyer. Okay. And the reason I say seller is because it's a rollback assessment. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
It's something that happened it's because of something that happened in the past, as I understand it. Is that how y'all understand it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be anything from your property borders where the city building a new road or some sort of special assessment, I think, can play into that, can it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's as a result of the sale. I mean, I think that's a negotiable deal. I've never had that happen in 15 years, so let's not worry about it.
Yeah, it does sound like something that I'm not going to overmanage.
Yeah, right. Okay, and also another thing is, I've sold a lot of properties where, it said the seller on mineral rights do convey.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, those mineral rights are already owned by someone else.
Yeah, they've already conveyed them. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they've been conveyed, and a lot of times it's owned by the city, it's owned by the original developer, so, but it's in here. So, okay, lease agreements. All right. Any lease purchase, any, like if there's somebody in the property, the buyer has to get a copy of those tenancy agreements, whatever they are. And if those leases are not acceptable to the buyer, then the buyer has 5 days to notify the seller in writing they're not buying. Do you understand? The seller has 5 business days to get a copy of any leases on the property to the buyer. And then the buyer has an additional 5 days to notify the seller if they're not moving forward with the purchase because they don't like the lease.
Okay.
This applies to current leases. I thought it was going somewhere else and I started talking, but I was wrong. That's what it applies to right there.
Okay.
Okay. And right here talks about how leases are going to be handled. Anything different needs to be put on an addendum to the purchase agreement. Okay, if there is no property owners association, you just check up here. If there is a property owners association, then all of this stuff needs to be agreed to here. Your buyer needs to put whatever. So, assessments that become due prior to closing, but after acceptance, date of this agreement should be paid by the seller, usually, because it's still before closing. Owners association assessments that are approved prior to closing but aren't due until after closing, normally would be paid by the buyer, but not necessarily,
That'd
It's
be
kind
like
of
a homeowners association fee, monthly dues or something. I mean, it's not.
that's right here. Owners association dues will be prorated between buyer and seller at time of closing.
Oh.
So if it's already become due, and paid, let's say it's due after closing, but it's been billed before closing, then that amount gets prorated. So in other words, most of that's going to be paid by the buyer because most of that year the buyer is going to be in the property.
Yeah.
But if it starts, 2 days before closing, the seller needs to go ahead and pay it, and it gets prorated back to their amount gets paid back to the seller at closing.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying? Like, if a bill comes for the homeowners association dues,
Right.
The seller needs to go ahead and pay it, but they're going to get their part back. They're going to get most of that back after closing.
Yeah, prorated for however many days.
Yeah.
Okay.
James, do you have any questions about any of this?
No, yeah, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And if y'all need to get off the phone, get off here, just go ahead and get off. I don't even know if there's another class right after this. There may be, so we need to hurry up. Okay, fees charged for verification of dues and assessments required for closing are to be paid by the seller. Okay, that's homeowner association. If it has anything to do with the sale itself, any fees that have to be paid to the homeowners association required for getting the thing closed, which I've never really heard of that. But if there are, they have to be paid by the seller. Okay.
Whose responsibility is it to get a copy of the homeowners association agreement and all that stuff?
Really, it kind of falls on the shoulders of the agent. And so there is a way to do that through the Baldwin County Association. Baldwin County website. You go on the website and you go to probate, and then you go to deeds and records, and then you either go to recording and then go to deeds and records, or deeds and records and then recording, and then go in and enter the name of the subdivision. And if they have been recorded, which most of them are to be valid, that's where you find them.
Okay.
So it's Alabama, Baldwin County, Alabama.gov. Then go to probate. Then I think it's on a drop down on the left, under probate, it's either deeds and records or recording.
Okay.
And you click on that, and then the next one's going to be deeds and records or recording, and you click on that, and then it's going to give you a page where you can enter the subdivision name.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Survey. All right. They can ask for an existing survey, or they can ask for a new survey, and it says who will pay for it down here. Okay. If a seller has an existing survey but it's old, your buyer may want a new survey, but they may have to pay for it themselves. All of this, everything that a buyer asks for, takes away from the desirability of the offer. Everything a buyer asks to be paid by the seller or provided by the seller takes away, it like minimizes, even if they're offering full price, it takes away a little bit, it knocks a little bit away from the desirability of the offer. So if your buyer is asking for a whole bunch of stuff here, and then an inspection contingency comes up and there are repairs to be made, they can't ask for the moon. It's kind of like I said, the likelihood of getting much, once you've asked for stuff up front, the likelihood of getting down the road is less. Y'all follow me? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Marcus, are you still there?
It doesn't sound like it.
Doesn't. Sounds like he went away.
Yeah.
He'll probably come back. But anyway, James, I'm going to go ahead and move on through if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Are you back, Marcus?
I'm back.
Okay. All right. So final walkthrough. And by the way, the survey, just make sure you're real clear. Don't leave this to chance here. Because if a survey is old, what I was just saying is, if a survey is old, a new survey needs to be done and paid for by somebody. If this property's been out there for 20 years and no new survey's been done, there could be a fence encroaching, there could be, something that is affecting the property that has changed. So just make sure that y'all read through that part right there, okay? And that you make sure that that is very clear to your buyer when they make the offer. All right, final and to your sellers. Final walkthrough. Verification of condition. And by the way, that's very negotiable. Who pays for the survey? And what I was saying is the more you ask for up front, the less you're going to get in. The more stuff you ask for up front, the less likely you're going to get the price, the offer price accepted. And for everything you ask for, the less the seller is going to be willing to move forward or counter reasonably.
Liz, shouldn't a buyer agent, transaction broker, whichever, contact the listing agent and kind of talk to them about this stuff before they put it all in writing?
No.
Is that a no-no?
No, I'm going to tell you why. When you've got a hot market, which Baldwin County is still kind of in that, you know, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen.
Right.
But in the market conditions that we have had up to now, while you're doing all that stuff, that agent could be going and shopping your offer. I don't like to call agents and tell them an offer's coming. I know people disagree with me.
Oh.
There are people who disagree with me. Here's why. I have seen an agent pick up the phone and call other people that were interested in that property to get offers, to get into a multiple offer situation. And what I always do, and this is in a hot market. Understand, if you're in a slower market, it's a different story. But if you call them up and you tell them blah, 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 you can do that. But why? They're going to read it over when they get it anyway. You know, if there's something unusual, like if the price is really, really low, what I used to always do if I had a buyer that was making a low offer, I would call that agent on the other side and I would say, I want you to know this is a low offer. And what I want to ask you for, and what the buyer wants to ask for, is the courtesy of a reply. If the seller cannot accept the offer outright, please give us the courtesy of a reply. And what you're saying there is, if they say no, they say no, but please don't say no. Please give us a counter. No matter what the counter is, please give us a counter.
Okay.
That way you're not dead in the water.
Then you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah. Don't tell the buyer that's what you're going to do.
Okay.
But I would go ahead and get the offer in and then call the agent.
Okay.
And if there's weird stuff in it, I would call the agent once you've sent over the offer and say, there are some unusual things in this offer. Please call me and we'll discuss if you want to.
Okay.
But I always would get the offer to them,
Mm-hmm.
and I never gave a whole lot of time for a reply. Again, I'm talking a hot market. Okay. If the market is so slow that you feel like you can give them a day, 24 hours, but I never gave more than 24 hours, unless the agent said something along the lines of, the sellers are out of town and it's going to take me a little time to get in touch with them.
Yeah.
Can you give me 2 days? Because they're on the road and flying on planes and I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to reach them.
Okay.
In a case like that, now they may be stalling anyway, waiting for another offer. So always be aware of that there may be other offers waiting in the wings. But in a hot market, I used to give, like if it was before noon, I'd give them till 5 o'clock. If it was afternoon, I'd give them till 10 a.m. the next morning.
Okay.
Don't leave a big window open for other buyers to come in and steal your deal. You know,
Right.
just
Okay.
don't force as much as you can. Try to force them to go ahead and work that offer and make it happen. Okay.
All right.
Final walkthrough. Always have a final walkthrough. It is not as a contingency of sale. You understand what that means? You're not saying they're not going to buy the property if they don't like what they see on the walkthrough. It is to make sure that the property is in basically the same condition, that repairs have been completed as agreed, and the seller has complied with seller's other obligations as to the agreement. The utilities are supposed to be on as of date of closing. Electric, water, sewer, and gas. It is up to your buyer to contact the utility companies in time to have that switched over to them on the date of closing or before. Okay? If they want to have electricity, they need to call the utility companies. All right, closing and possession dates. Y'all, if you can, try to avoid that I want to, rent back a couple of days deal. Try to avoid that, because if damage happens to the property, if the property burns down due to that seller being in there, the homeowner's insurance probably ain't gonna pay for that.
Yeah.
And I just don't like these extended possession dates. I always feel that possession should be taken at closing. It's my opinion, and whatever. Who's in here? Somebody is in here.
Tis I.
Hey, man, how are you doing?
Good, good, good.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So I guess another class is about to start.
I have no idea. I just walked. I have no idea. Life has been crazy the past couple of days, and
I know.
And I just heard somebody talking in here, and I said, "That sounds like Liz."
It's me. It's me.
Yeah.
Glad to see you. I'm glad to be talking with all of you. We're almost done here. We're doing a contracts class, which we're only halfway through the contract, but we've been talking a lot questions wise. So you're welcome to hang in here as much as you want.
I'm just sit down and enjoy life.
Okay. And I don't know if another class is coming behind this one. I think one is, but I'm not sure when it is. I think it may be this afternoon. Do y'all know?
I have not seen one, another one.
Okay.
You doing the class tomorrow or the next day or something?
Yeah, there are classes almost every day, but we're doing them all through Zoom pretty much, which is great. Although I was really looking forward to getting in the office and seeing people, but oh well. All right. I'll see y'all in June.
I hear you, babe.
I heard you cough, Ed.
I know. I've
Got to get out of there, buddy.
Yeah, what's happening, man? Where'd that cough come from?
Yeah, I've had a sinus.
All right, so let's go back up. I'm just kidding you, Ed. All right, so okay, so let's see. We just talked about possession. All right. Extension of closing date. All right, now this is where, remember I said there was a thing that said it would be if a new mortgage, if terms of purchase require a new mortgage and lender has issued a written unconditional. Okay, this used to say if terms of the mortgage required if terms of the purchase required a new mortgage, that left a huge wide window for people to say, oh, I don't like my mortgage, I've changed my mind, I think I'm going to get a new mortgage. That's why they came in here and said the lender has written an unconditional commitment letter no later than the date of closing named above, but is otherwise reasonably delayed in consummating the mortgage set forth herein. So in other words, you've got a closing date that is set, but the lender says we've got an unconditional closing, but there's been an earthquake, an unconditional approval, but there's been an earthquake or whatever. I don't know why there would need a new mortgage, but the lender has issued an unconditional commitment date. All right, but they have to do a new mortgage. That's what this is for. I have never had that happen. All right, but right here it's saying like insurance. Okay, so I did have this happen. I had an insurance company it was Farmers Insurance in Fairhope. They're wonderful. Malone Insurance Agency. They are wonderful. I don't know if they're on our vendors list, but they ought to be. They're awesome. They wrote the only insurance policy for one of my closings on the day that Rita moved into the Gulf, Hurricane Rita.
Wow.
Yeah. And I called Mike Malone, and I said, we are supposed to have a closing at 2 p.m. this afternoon. My people are coming from Wisconsin. Everything they own is on the truck. And we have to close this because they don't have enough money to spend a night in a hotel. We
Oh.
have to close this.
Yeah.
And so I called him that morning knowing that Rita was going to be coming. And he said, let me see what I can do. And he called me back. The closing was at the closing was at 4. And he called me back at 2. And he said, we are going to be able to write this. The
Wow.
district manager for the Southeast is going to approve it, but we're not going to have approval until right at 4. He's not going to be able to get me anything in writing until right around the time your closing is supposed to start. So I called the closing company. I said, we're closing. And they didn't believe me. And they said, well, nothing's closing today. In fact, we're probably going to be closing early. I said, do not close early. We will be there at 4 o'clock and we're going to be closing. I have already heard from the insurance company, and they're like, nothing's closing. Well, we got there at 4 o'clock and we walked in the door and they were indeed getting ready to close their doors. And I said, we're here for our closing. And they said, you're not closing. And I said, you call Mike Malone at Malone Insurance Agency and tell him that, because he's just told me we're closing. And they said, well, we'll have to do it tomorrow because we're not ready. I said, I've been calling you all day long to tell you we're closing this thing, and we're either closing it or this family right here and I will be sleeping in your lobby. And
Don't piss Liz off.
I was mad. I was so mad. And they closed it. They said, you'll have to wait. It's going to take us about 30 minutes. And I said, we can wait. And they closed it. And they were
I
mad.
thought there was some sort of I don't know if it's a written or unwritten rule that if there's a named storm, they pretty much shut everything down.
Yes, yes. That's why we had to get approval from this district manager.
So that's really an insurance company issue then. It's not a legal issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least then it was. Now there may be other things that have come into play since I stopped selling real estate 5 years ago. But this was early in my career, but nothing changed until, I mean, I moved into the team leader position at the end of 2013. So that's when I stopped selling real estate. But until then, it wasn't different then. But some things may have changed since then, but I haven't heard of it.
No,
But just as a policy, I know that all insurance companies stop writing policies. And I've never heard of another policy ever being written when there's a hurricane in the Gulf.
Yeah.
And I saw Mike Malone not too long ago. He was in our office dropping off goodies. And I saw him and I told him that story. I reminded him of that story because that was like one of my first deals years ago. It was in my first year of real estate. And he remembered it. And he said, do you know that was the only policy written in the Southeast for our company that day? So Malone Insurance Agency and Mike Malone, I think, and there's another guy over there, Michael Werniff. Both of those guys are great. So
That's Farmers Insurance, did you say?
in Fairhope.
Okay.
It's the Malone Insurance Agency and it's Farmers Insurance.
Yeah.
In Fairhope. Great, great, great company.
I think they were supposed to come in yesterday originally, I thought, as part of at the end of the team meeting.
Oh, Malone was?
I know what it said, Farmers Insurance, didn't it? You
Yeah,
got-
it was. Yeah,
it didn't
I
say
have
Mike,
that.
but I'm assuming it would have been.
Yeah, well, since it was remote, I guess everything got canceled.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
okay. All right. Risk of loss. Okay. If there's an act of God and the seller can't get the property back to its condition of said closing date, the buyer can cancel. They have the option of canceling. They get their earnest money back, providing that notice of cancellation is received prior to the closing date, or the buyer may accept the property in its damaged condition. Risk of loss as set forth above shall be on seller until title is conveyed. But once they close, it's the buyers. So it's kind of like up to the buyer what they're going to do. The seller doesn't have a whole lot of responsibility there as far as making that decision. And poor seller, and those things do happen. All right, time to respond. Okay. Ed, were you in here when I was talking about not giving a whole lot of time to respond?
No, but I've heard that before.
Yeah, when you've got a contract that is, especially, now this is more applicable in a hot market, like we have had up till now. I never gave more than half a day, because agents, if they have time, can, and some will, go out and shop your offer. Like they'll call agents that have shown, that have other people that they've shown the property to, call them all and say, I've got an offer. If you want to make an offer on this, go ahead and get it in. We may end up in a multiple offer situation. Go ahead and get your offers in. And that happens frequently. So if you're in a hot market, a buyer's agent has the ability to limit that somewhat by saying, if you're presenting the offer before noon, give them till 5 o'clock. If you're presenting the offer, in the afternoon, give them until 10 a.m. the next morning, or give them till noon, depending on how late it is. But don't give them a whole lot of time to go and play around with your offer.
Excuse me.
And the offer, when signed by all parties and written notification has been delivered to the party, will constitute a buying agreement. Okay, so always, always, always respond in writing. Always get your people to sign it as quick as they can. Because even a verbal acceptance means nothing. Now, communication from agent to agent, meaning once you have emailed this offer to the agent, it's in their hands. And that is considered getting it to the buyer. Y'all understand that?
Mm-hmm.
But just calling an agent and saying, we've got a deal, it's, most agents will honor that. Most people will honor that, but not always. I myself had a personal offer that we made verbally. It was accepted by the seller. The seller wrote on a napkin that he would accept our offer price. And then that night, did I tell y'all this story before in another class?
Sounds familiar.
Okay. I won't go over it again because I think all three of you were in my class.
Yeah.
Where I was talking about it, they wrote the acceptance on the napkin. And then they told us later, well, another offer had come in. When our agent went to take the offer, they said another offer had come in, and we were like, but we have this. And so it got into a big deal. And they consulted with attorneys and all that stuff, but we got the house. Because the broker told the seller to do the right thing. So I did tell y'all the story again. Okay, never mind.
That's okay.
All right, I do that. All right, so earnest money. Okay. If you've got somebody sending money, like they've come from out of town and they don't have their checkbook with them or whatever, they need to overnight it to you. That's why that 3 business days is there. They need to overnight it to you. And it says earnest money to be deposited by broker within blank business days, 5 business days if left blank. This really helps you as an agent if the buyer doesn't get the money. It helps us as a company because deposited means when we put it in our bank account, not when the buyer deposits money with us. So just read that read that contract through really quickly.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
That is all dependent on if they accept the offer. So if they accept the offer, then they need to overnight the check.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If they don't accept the offer, did y'all know that even if you write offers it's supposed to be in DocuSign, in our loops, in our opportunities,
Yes.
even if it doesn't come through. And here's why. If there's a sale that fails, or if there's a deal that doesn't happen, go ahead and upload it to protect yourself, because that seller may come back and say that, well, we never got to an acceptance point because that agent did this, this, or this. Or we never got to closing because that agent didn't do blah, blah, blah.
So CYA, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't ever have a deal that fails and we go in and can't find it in because if we get a phone call about it, or somebody decides to sue somebody and we have no documentation and you don't have anything we can follow up with you on, it's not good.
So we really need all the written back and forth. Don't just wait until you know it's done. Get it all in there and have an audit.
Yeah. Yeah.
We do. I'm working on with Sarah. Sarah's my mentor, and everything we do is through, through the rooms and the letters and whatever. Yeah, everything's done through there. We do everything.
It just keeps a record, that you can refer back to also. So just for convenience sake, it's good to have it so you can just pull it all up whenever you need to. Okay, condominium disclosures. If it is a condominium, you need to get all of these things to the buyers. The seller needs to get these things to the buyer, and you as the agent for the seller need to facilitate these things happening, or as much of it as you
Hey,
can.
can I ask a real quick question on the earnest money? I meant to ask this, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Should the earnest money come through the buyer agent and then go to the seller's broker?
No.
Or how does that work normally? Or do you say directly overnight it to the selling broker?
Okay, that's not how earnest money generally works. This is the industry standard, okay? Now, that's not to say it can't be changed. Like in Florida, they want the title company to hold or whoever's going to be closing it.
Yeah, right.
They want the title company to be holding the earnest money.
Mm-hmm.
In Alabama, the brokerages usually hold the earnest money.
Right.
And it's usually the brokerage of the buyer's agent.
Oh, okay.
So as an agent of Keller Williams, if it is a typical normal deal, which most of them, well, are any of them typical, really, I don't know. But if it's fairly normal, and if everything goes the way it normally should with earnest money, you're going to bring the earnest money into Carson and give it to them.
As the buyer's agent or transaction?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. You're going to get that money to Carson, and you're going to get it to them as quickly as you can. And if it's over 24 hours, then we're starting to get into a problem area.
Okay.
Okay. Now, down at the beach, you can give it to Jen because she gets it deposited. But, you don't hold funds.
Oh, no.
And there is a form.
Yeah.
There's an earnest money form in our documents.
Mm-hmm.
Fill that out and turn it in with the earnest money check. Okay. As soon as you have earnest money, you turn it into Carson. Now, Carson doesn't like to hold a lot of earnest money checks. He's like, well, just give it to me when the deal, is accepted or whatever. You have a right, we have a right, anybody has a right to ask Carson to hold that money, that check. And if it's money, by all means, give it to Carson. But if it's a check, even if it's not a fully accepted deal yet, go ahead and get it to Carson. And, that's my opinion, and that's what I always did. I would say I prefer you go ahead and hold it for me. And then if the deal doesn't work out, and you can wait till you get an acceptance, okay? I was always a little overly cautious, but I was working with HUD too, where it could take weeks to get a full acceptance. So do what you want on that, but I'm just going to say, once you have an earnest money check, let's say there's a deal where there's a lot of weird back and forth and it's taking a week or so to get the deal to work out, go ahead and get that money to Carson. If you're seeing it's going to be more than 2 or 3 days, get that money to Carson. Have that earnest money be held by Carson. You don't want to run the risk of misplacing a check, do you? That's not fun. You don't want to run the risk of not getting it turned in on time. So if there's, do y'all understand why I'm saying that?
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm saying? Think of earnest money as a hot potato.
Yeah.
And you need to keep your eyes on it, but you need to get it out of your hands as soon as you can.
Okay.
And I have thought I lost an earnest money check before, and boy, it was a cashier's check. You think I was scared?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was. We found it. Okay. Okay. Number 33 is basically saying the agents involved in the transaction have the right to see all the documentation. You know, the final closing statement provided at closing, all of the documentation that has to do with anything to do with this sale that the title company can provide. In other words, it lets you sit in on the closing, which you want to be at the closing. Okay. Okay, here is where you can write anything else that you want to write. Okay, if it's too much to write, then put C addendum 1 and then do an addendum and number all of your addendums. Now, addendums, I always put this statement in my addendums. This addendum, if in conflict with the purchase agreement, supersedes the purchase agreement. All other terms of the purchase agreement apply. Y'all got that?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so this is very self-explanatory, all of this right here. Okay, seller's acceptance of offer or countered. And they come in here and they say what the counter is, and back and forth until you get an acceptance.
Liz, do we have a form for the addendum?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a form, and it's going to have that kind of thing, that language about all of the terms of the purchase agreement apply.
No, I don't think it has that on there.
No.
It may.
Seems like it's kind of
You
standard.
said if this addendum is in conflict
With the purchase agreement. This addendum supersedes the purchase agreement. Now this is my wording, Ed.
Yeah, but
So you don't have to remember it exactly word for word.
Yeah.
But after that, I put all other terms of the purchase agreement apply.
Okay.
So you're saying, you know, this takes precedence, but everything else is okay.
Okay.
Okay. And if you have additional counters that are not, I mean, there's room for several counters here, but if there are additional counters, do them on an addendum to the purchase agreement. And remember, number all of your addendums because every one of them becomes part of the contract. So number every one of them.
Oh, okay. So you don't have to redo the entire contract every time. You do an addendum.
Yeah, no, that would be
wow,
too.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be too much.
Yeah, I know, because I'm sitting here, you know.
Yeah. No, if it goes.
I did one of these yesterday or the
Yeah.
day before, and man, you know, for me the first time it took forever, you know, and then I was talking with Sarah. Yeah, well, you're gonna have to redo, blah blah. If something happens, but I see now the addendum. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So, you know, this is, I mean, right here it tells you see addendum 1, see addendum 2. It's probably going to be addendum 1, unless there's some other weird thing. But you're going to put on that addendum an additional counter. You know, you'll write countered right here, see addendum whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to take
you to resubmit the entire thing again, or just that piece of paper? Just the
when you say resubmit, what do you mean?
What I meant.
The whole agreement, just keep submitting it over again with the addendum. Is that what you mean, Ed, or just?
Yes, that's what I meant. So you're just passing the addendum back and forth is all you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you're doing additional addendums. Like your addendum number 1. Okay, is going to say sales price to be, like if you have the seller, okay, and you're still countering, your seller's going to click, you're going to put, and by the way, I still can't, some of my stuff that I ought to be able to autofill, I can't for some reason. So I would print this and check it, okay? But then you put in, I guess down here it doesn't autofill. That's weird. When you get this far.
When you in DocuSign, you don't have to worry about that. You can fix that.
Well, I'm in the autofill contract.
But I don't mean the autofill contract. I mean, and like when you bring it into DocuSign.
Okay.
You don't have to. You just throw in there text. Blah blah. Sarah doesn't even use autofills.
Okay.
It's so simple to use because you just drag a text box over. You just drag it over.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. It's different.
But anyway, if you get to this point, okay, put see addendum 1. And then you go in there and you say sales price to be blah, blah, blah. Pool equipment will not convey, you know, that sort of stuff. Okay. Just whatever your seller says at that point, but you do it on an addendum. Every time there's an encounter, do a new addendum. Addendum number 3, addendum number 4.
How do you indicate that on in this area here, Liz? Like here.
What now?
Well, that page you're on, it says see addendum number.
Yeah.
Now there's room for 1. Is there room for more?
No. Addendum number 1 will be, you'll send addendum number 1 along with the contract. The first time you do it, I mean, you need to send it. Well,
right.
Yeah, because they're not going to see this part until you send addendum number 1.
Right.
Okay, so you're going to sign it. Your seller's going to sign it, and you're going to send this page back over again, plus addendum number 1.
Right.
Once they've done that, then the other side will send back addendum number 2, addendum number 3. Okay. Now, you're not going to have a place to go in here and write all of addendum.
Right.
When you get to the point where you get into like 4,
yeah.
At that point, if you don't have an agreement, you maybe should go in and do a new contract. Or not necessarily, but the addendums just need to be real clean and orderly and just.
Well, that's why I was wondering, like on page 12, is it 12 that we were on now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is where you document that we have an addendum number 1.
Yes.
Get the signatures, and then you have addendum 1 that goes over with the original contract or not?
This page needs to go back with addendum 1 because it says see addendum 1.
That page.
Now, what happens when you do addendum number, the seller does addendum number?
I honestly,
2.
I don't know. I mean, I think I would write, I mean, if it was me receiving that, I would write see addendum number 2, and I would send that addendum number 1 back with addendum number 2. That's what I would do.
Okay.
you know, you're going to be dealing with agents from other companies.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, but on the ones that I would get, if I was countering an addendum, I would write at the bottom of it, see addendum number 3. And then I would send that with addendum number 3. That's just me.
Okay.
And I'm not sure exactly what it says on the addendum page, but I don't think that verbiage is on there. But that's what I would do. Okay. So we've done it, guys. We're done.
Yay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for me?
No.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll always run into unique things that need to be addressed as they come, but that's fine.
Yeah.
You can't-
So I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to share this morning with you. It's been fun for me. I miss you. I am going to be doing a listing agreement class tomorrow at 10 o'clock right here. So if y'all want to join in on that, I would love to see you.
How long do you
Like
think
the couch.
you allow for that one?
What'd you say?
How
said,
long
like
did you
the
allow
couch.
for that class?
Oh, my couch. Oh, I don't know. I don't know, Marcus, because, you know, I intended to finish this one at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, I know.
You know, but for some reason, you guys, I mean, I kind of know you guys, you know, we kind of play around and talk a lot and stuff. And I tend to expound a little bit more when I know that it's a casual setting.
Yeah, this is
So,
good for me.
you know, at the beginning, if any of you need to say, I'm going to have to step out at whatever time, let me know. I know that 9:30 to 11 was allowed for this class. I do not know how much time is allowed, is set aside from, you know, for tomorrow's class. I'm guessing it would be maybe 10 to 11:30, but
Yeah. Okay. No, I just
I'll
wondered.
look
I'm
and
agent
try to
on
fit it
duty.
into that.
I'm agent on duty tomorrow morning for 8 to 12, but from what I heard, you don't have to come in for that now. I assume that means
Right.
Melissa will roll it over to myself. And so
Right.
I could theoretically sit in on the class. That's what I was
Yeah.
trying to figure out.
Sure. So, and I'd love to have you in the class.
Thank
So if
you.
that's what you want to do, anyway, you guys are definitely learning based guys, all 3 of you. So I appreciate that. That'll serve you well once you get into regularly doing your sales. So,
Yep.
all right. Well, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate
y'all have a great afternoon and stay healthy.
it. See you now.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.